Yeah, I'm going to pick up right now.
You should just say that. What he said. Yeah. I don't know if you guys saw the message. Are you talking about Man's message? Yeah. That's likeness, man. Did you like that likeness? I didn't like the way it started. Did you like the manager's message? I'm sometimes it's better to when I get
There's just nothing.
Does it have plug-in? It's good plug-in. I've got to do time and sign on.
Yep, just look her.
This part I've been in the back, so
We're all so far away. I love seeing the artwork.
Yeah. Okay. There's my chair. Hey, you know, y'all got to sign receipts for everybody.
We got you signed.
Oh, well.
This is like a start work session, pretty much.
So for a short period, it's on manual. Some of them is when there's something that's
I feel like I need to sit on the telephone.
I know, I feel like the table is higher up.
Yeah.
Or I'm short.
I think the chairs are very squishy. So you sit down and
work. I know that we've all had some one-on-one meetings with Trey and department heads to see what direction we're going in. I do want to mention 3 quick things unrelated to today. On next Tuesday's agenda, there is a resolution that I included to oppose one of the House bills. I'd like you to read it. It is the omnibus bill on zoning, and it takes a significant amount of responsibility away from cities. And so I think it's very important that we weigh in. Tammy, I know you were at the league meeting, I'm sure.
Yeah, I was at City Vision, and just about every mayor I spoke with the past 2 days, they're all issuing the same resolution, and I think they're all kind of modeled after one another. But it really not only takes power away from council, it takes power away from residents from being able to voice opinions. And it's a real problem. There are some odds and ends that are good in there, but the good is all launched in with a lot of bad. And that was the overwhelming opinion by communities of all sizes at City Vision this week.
So if you want to take a look at that, the one that we used was modeled after Wilmington. Mayor Sapo is the head of Metro Mayors, and he shared his resolution with us. It looked pretty straightforward, so that's the one that I included in. Secondly, you'll notice that something that got added, and it was changing the amounts that when you file for mayor, it's $75. For council people, it's $25. It has been that way, I think, forever and ever and ever. The statute allows to do 1% of what the salary is. I have proposed that we not do a full 1%, but mayor would be $300 to file, and then at-large and districts boost that up to $200 to file. It is less than the statutory maximum that we could do. I looked at Durham's. They're in the $400 range. I know that the city of High Point does do the full 1% range. So if you would just look at that and give me your feedback by Tuesday. If you have any concerns or whatever, we could tweak it in advance, but that's what I'm proposing that we do.
So are you proposing, you're not proposing the 1%, where'd you get the amount?
It was less than 1%. I just thought the full 1% might be a little much, so I
don't think it's too much more than what it would be even now, because the salary,
So
ain't that much.
I think for council members, it was like $250, $275, something like that. If you would want to go with the full 1%, I'm happy to do the full 1%. Mayor would have been up about $350, is that right? And then council members were about $250?
Effective that you're bringing.
Well, so I just did 302. I didn't take the full 1%, but if you want to go 1%, I'm happy.
The effective date?
This election. Yes. So give me some feedback. If you want to go with the full 1%, that's fine. And then I believe that this council needs to be the council that decides on the naming opportunity for Yvonne Johnson.
I agree.
And we really have to make a decision. If you have ideas, I know there have been some talks about libraries. We may have some roadblocks with that. If you would reach out to, I'm going to nominate Chris. If you would reach out to Chris with any ideas that you have, we really need to focus on that in the next couple of weeks so we can get something done before this council on December 2nd, which is 215 days from today. This council is our last official day. So give us some ideas for what we can do for Yvonne. That's all I have, so.
Could I go back to the
Yes.
House bill, the bill you're talking about?
Yes,
Have you seen the House Bill 765 as well?
that is the
Not that one, that's another. I know that one, and there's another, that restricts what we can do inclusive. That's the one where they abolishing the hub office in Raleigh.
Oh, I did not realize they had abolished the office.
That's in the bill.
Okay.
And so we need to post that.
All right, we'll take a look at that one as well. Anyway, that's all I have. I'll turn it back over to Trey.
And I'll be really quick initially. I'm going to turn over our first portion, our first 30 minutes today will be Chris Bainan, who has been the consultant for the strategic planning downtown. Zach, I'll turn it over if you want to give a little bit of introduction. Some of you saw some this morning, and then we'll get into some of our updates. Thank you.
Thanks, Trey, Madam Mayor, and council staff. I'm going to be real quick. The business community and the foundations and the community came to us late last year, really November, December, and said, we want you to update downtown. We've got a lot of things happening at the airport, we've got a lot of things happening with Toyota. I know you did a master plan 6 years ago, COVID hit, and everything else was going on. So we want to financially back you to update your plan. I sent y'all an email. When we did this pre-COVID, we went to each district and met in your districts at a place that you choose, and that we will try to meet with your constituents in your district. Goldie, I think we were at Rev Mill. Sarah Healy helped really run that process. There will be myself, maybe Rob. The at-large members will work with you in whatever capacity you want. If you just want to tack on to the council district or however, we'll figure it out. But the goal is we want to reach as many people for feedback as possible. We have 2 upcoming charrettes that are open. One at the Civil Rights Museum May 14th, one at the South End Brewery on May 12th, which I'll send you an email about as well. We've had over 2,000 responses from a survey. To have over 2,000 responses on a survey is incredible. So we are reaching a lot of folks and trying to get to 3,000 or more. MIG is a consulting firm that was engaged through a process. Actually, ironically, the G in MIG, and Chris can explain it, was the first initial of the lady's last name from Greensboro that helped found MIG 42 years ago. Chris and his team, Marcia in the back, they are internationally recognized. Earlier this year, he was in Cape Town running a World Summit last year in Stockholm in Sweden, in Berlin, and in Tokyo and beyond, and a lot in the States. And you'll see some slides on that. We do in Colorado Springs, San Antonio, Seattle, the Needle. And so we are very fortunate to have MIG, one of the best international consultants in helping us. And I'll turn it over to Chris for a brief 4-hour discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor, members of the council. Really great to be with you here today. I will say, I don't think it's ironic that the G in MIG came from Greensboro. I think that it's actually quite natural that we feel such an affinity to this city, to this state. It's in our roots and in our blood, literally, as a firm that's been built over the last several decades. And I've been fortunate to be a part of it for about 2.5 decades right now. So deeply involved and have been deeply involved in Greensboro. And Zach, said all those accolades or whatever about us. We really see it. This is about you. That's what matters. And we are so honored and blessed to be with you here today. So I'm going to have, I'm going to kind of fly through these slides. Happy to entertain any questions and things you all may have. This is what we see as part of a process, right? This is a touch point just to let you know, hey, give you a heads up, what we're doing, what's going on, and then we'll obviously be coming back to you more. And what is going on is a lot. I think it's really important, and kind of what we're able to bring is perspective from working in all these other places and saying, you all are doing well. There has been dramatic change and as many challenges every downtown. It's like, hey, we've got this, we've got that. COVID was a big hit. We all know that. But if you look at the numbers and you see what has happened in this downtown in just the last several years, nearly $500 million of development, 1 million square feet of built or renovated space for the last 10 years. These are really strong numbers, and they stack up with any of the different towns we've been working in. But that said, you're never done, right? We're really, really great downtown. We can be even better. We should evolve. Downtowns and city identity and city building that you are all a part of, it never ends. You have to keep going and develop the new set of things to do. And importantly, so that's what we're here doing right now. Marcia, our team, we're in town over these several months. It's a pretty quick burn process. We'll be rounding kind of third base toward the end of the summer. But we've been doing a lot of different things about with a part of this plan already. And importantly, as Zach pointed out, the coalition of partners is really key. The public sector coming together, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector. In our downtown work, in our experience, you have to have that to thrive. You have to have that for implementation. And we'll talk about implementation toward the end of the slideshow. But yeah, this was literally just a couple days ago. It said 1,700%, because that's what we had. Just within a day or two, we've gotten over 300 more. It's continuing to build. It's open until Monday, the survey, and we're getting a lot of interesting feedback, and we're able to take that data, both quantitative and qualitative, and add to the whole process. So if you have not taken the survey yet, or your friends and neighbors and loved ones, do a little screenshot here, and the QR code will come up for you, and you can take the survey. We would love for you to do that. But then again, this is also a forum for that feedback to us, and we're doing a ton of engagement just this week. Executive committee, steering committee, focus groups that we've been working with, and State of Downtown Community Workshop last night was great participation, and finally here today. And so this is just some of the different events and things that we've had that have been really, really additive to this story. And that's what this is. I'm going to get into now a little bit of a story about this is what we're starting to hear. And these are, processes like this kind of start like this, and then you filter them down through the sieve ultimately of feasibility, phasing, funding. But you got to start at a high level of casting this net, as we're talking about, with all the community members and getting all the ideas out there. And so they've been in a range of areas, ranging from, hey, how do we make downtown a better place and venue, more walkable? What's the future economy of downtown? As Zach pointed out, things have shifted since COVID, not just here, across the country, across the world. We have to recalibrate. We have market analysts on our team who are helping to recalibrate that. So a range of different ideas and things we've heard from the community. One of those things is, hey, we have a lot of great assets, and you can't read this, but all these dots on here represent a cultural asset, a park, a major business, a sporting venue like the Grasshopper Stadium and all that. But is it adding up to the sum of the parts? And one of the great things that we see in downtowns, and great downtowns that evolve, there are districts that form around a place that has a sense of destination, has a sense of more than just going to that one spot. You're able to spend the afternoon of the day there. So just an example, the ballpark. Lots of stuff has happened around there. It's been great. The Hyatt Place, the new Ace Hotels coming on board, 400 Bellmead, great office. But are we creating a true neighborhood, a true district? I think that is opportunity here. As you start filling in the pieces and the texture, we're getting the big pieces in. One of the strategies here that can help with tourism attraction, revenue generation, local business support, all of these kind of pieces of the puzzle are a part of this planning process. Then we got to make sure we connect these districts. We're going to be talking a lot about that, and there's a lot of best practices and things we can look at in places near and far related to development, redevelopment models. How are we making it work in a new interest rate environment? What are the tools and levers that we can pull? This is one of the things that you all have put forth, the youth sports capital. We think that is a great idea, and we think that the downtown plan can and should be a vehicle for all kinds of sports and entertainment, including attracting youth sports. We also know that it's not always about a gorgeous, incredible, world-class facility like we are in, which I congratulate you all on. It's also about those interstitial spaces, and are there things we can do in the meantime to address that empty lot, to look at that parking lot in a different way that can have maybe temporary or semi-permanent things until it's ready for additional development to come in. So we've heard these things, we're exploring all that. People have talked about water. Wow, can we get more water? We don't have a major river running through here or a major water body, but can we infuse more of that resource for attraction, for relaxation, etc.? Housing is something we've heard so much of, and we think it is a critical part of the future of this downtown. We're going to be continuing to explore models there, whether it's townhome types, senior housing, affordable housing, a mixed-use development. We think all of this has a place in this downtown environment and in this downtown plan. Speaking of housing and speaking of world-class ideas, the Greenway as an infrastructure project is really fantastic, and it's finally coming to full fruition here with the last segment being built. And this is an opportunity, and they've done it in other places around the country, where you take that public infrastructure investment and it's leveraged for that private development. And I'm getting the heads up from Trey, which I love here. Supporting small businesses and having incubators and women and minority-owned businesses. We've heard this. We need to find and ensure we have a place in the downtown in all kinds of different ways to work. We know the News and Records site is a big opportunity, really unparalleled. It's an amazing opportunity. We have not seen that sort of acreage in the downtown in the same way, but there are many other sites and places we'll be looking at and how we connect them. We know the streetscape projects have been ongoing. Completing those is going to be key, and ensuring that our downtown, we've heard time and time again people say, it needs to be walkable, safe, welcoming, comfortable, with street furniture, lighting, etc. All of that is a part of the mix of the things we've been doing. Another thing that's critical is transit. Any great downtown has accessible opportunities for folks, inclusive of all who may not want or be able to, or be able to afford a car. And this is a great thing. We're hearing the trolley is something, hey, we love it, we need to expand it more, we're going to be looking at that. Speaking of expansion, this is not just about the downtown. This is about the periphery around and all the different neighborhoods and districts. The Greenway on the east side is a critical piece we're looking at, as well as connecting, of course, to A&T and the Greensboro College, UNC Greensboro, also on the west side.
It was on there. It was on.
But it's on there.
Bennett.
Yes, I'm sorry, Bennett.
Yeah.
It's here, but on the southeast of downtown. Absolutely, sorry. Being at the forefront of innovation. This was a collaboration with A&T, and it was award-winning. DGI put it forth, and it's an award-winning thing. I mean, you are at the forefront of a lot of things. We're going to continue to infuse this. So as we look at all of the amenities, the park spaces, the streets, the walkability, how do we take this and make it this at the historic, incredible resource of the depot? All of these ideas are on the table. So that's the quick and dirty, just expanse of things we're starting to hear and populate the seeds of things. We're going to be going to the next parts of the process, which is all going to be about implementation. It's going to be about who is doing what are the funding tools. This cannot be DGI's plan. This cannot be the city's plan. This cannot be nonprofit sector's plan. It has to be everybody's plan. And I think the power of the funding behind it and the coalition and the committees that have been produced, that's where we have seen the best implementation of downtowns across the country, is that sort of partnership. So we're working on all of that, and how we make things a reality. This is not just going to be a vision plan. It's going to have a ton of strategic action to it. And with that, I will turn it back to Trey.
Thank you, Chris. I think we wanted to give a brief moment if there are any questions for Chris regarding the strategic plan, the survey, anything like that.
I think the key, Mr. Manager, if you don't mind, is again, to share your point about Bennett or, we're not looking at this as just downtown, it's how downtown can complement and be a part of a partnership with the entire community. And you saw on there, they actually had Wizard Chavis Noco, they had Bingham Park connection, and so we're trying to do this and reach as many people throughout the community as possible. And so please, we want to work with each council member and work with your constituents.
That is the Greenway plan, though the community's already decided.
Well, that's why we put it in there.
That we connect with Bennett and all of those camps in addition to going down to Bingham, all the way over to Baltimore. That is
the high school
that
too,
is
it's all
it.
got 'em.
So all that is an important connection, it's quite necessary. So yeah, it has to be, got to be focused on. So thank you for including it.
Yeah, absolutely, we need to. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate your time, and we look forward to working with you more.
Thank you. So as we transition, I will ask our staff that we get reconnected for a few presentations that we will have. So today is our longer session as we approach budget. I'll say this is not a budget presentation, but largely it is a collection of, one, the things that we discussed in some of our one-on-one conversations, also what we heard from some of the most recent community meetings, and then feedback that we've been gathering most recently in different discussions, whether it's council meetings, some of the most recent work sessions that we've had. I will tell you this is really a higher level view. We will drill down in some areas. We've tried to focus on some of the top areas that we heard from you. Now, I give this disclaimer. If you don't see something on here that a small thing that you've asked for, don't hold it against us. It's not that we're not looking at it or working on it, but we wanted to make sure we tried to capture some of the main things and the key highlights that collectively all of you really wanted to hear about. So first up will be Executive Director Jemiah Waterman, who will talk about compensation, which was one of the biggest topics on your list. You have John Decker or Tiffany Jones. John Decker just walked in on you. We'll talk about budget challenges and some drivers. Ken McDowell will be here to talk about infrastructure, which we all know is very important. A number of things he wants to talk about that all of us have been discussing, asking about, and receiving updates. And then lastly, Executive Director Sue Schwartz will talk about permanent supportive housing, which again, that's an example of one of those things. When I have one-on-ones, everybody collectively said housing is the top of my priority list. So again, I'm going to turn it over to first, or Mayor, I'll take a minute there. You want to talk about breaks or how we will do our breaks in between?
I thought they were broken into the schedule.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
either way.
And obviously, if somebody has to leave the room.
So we'll try to do maybe a five, no more than a 5 or 10 minute break between each to give us time to change over, give you time to stand up and rest your legs. So, Jemiah, you're up first.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Good afternoon, Council. The first topic we want to talk about in the area of compensation is advancing a living wage. At Council's direction over the last several years, the city has really worked to establish a minimum salary that would allow all of our workers to meet their basic needs, like food and housing and healthcare and transportation. And so today, while on paper, our current minimum is $18.75 per hour, or $39,000 per year. Virtually all city employees earn $20 per hour or more, and that translates to $41,600 per year. As you can see, there are about 69 employees whose current salary falls below that $20 threshold. We anticipate in the manager's recommended budget that we will have funding to bring those 69 employees up to that $20 threshold. And since it's such a small number, as most of our employees are already over that threshold, we don't anticipate the need for a comprehensive strategy to try to address compression. So while on paper we're at $18.75, in reality, almost all of our employees are at that $20 threshold. Those who are below tend to be our newer employees, and mostly in positions like crew member, in Parks and Rec, transportation, and water resources. We know that there is interest from council to make even more progress on establishing a living wage, and so there are two proposals here that I want to just briefly cover. One would be in the next fiscal year to increase that minimum salary to $21 per hour, or $43,680 per year. As you can see, there are currently 228 employees below that threshold. Almost all of them are in the general employee step plan. In order to do this, that would add about $3.2 million to next year's budget. About $500,000 of that would go to raising those 228 employees to the new threshold, but the bulk of those dollars will actually go to address compression, because we wouldn't want our longer tenured employees making the same as those newer hired employees coming in at $21 per hour. The second proposal is to establish a minimum salary of $47,840 per year, and that equates to $23 per hour. As you can see, that would impact significantly more employees, 463. These employees are scattered. They're not just in the general employee step plan, they would also be in the general employee salary structure, the merit system, if you will. And so the cost to raise those 400 plus employees to the new minimum would be a little over $2.3 billion. But the significant cost would be trying to mitigate the compression both in the step plan and in the general salary schedule that many of our employees are in. And so in order to not create compression by raising the minimum wage, we would need to spend a little less than $27 million to create that buffer in the organization. No matter which proposal, I guess, we proceed with for next fiscal year, it is our goal internally as staff to reach a $25 per hour minimum, and that equates to $52,000 per year, no later than fiscal year 29-30. Any questions about that?
Jemiah, so what is projected to be in this budget? I know you're waiting for direction from us, but
Yes.
I know you must have some number plugged into the budget.
Well, that's probably a question for John. I would say, obviously, between the two proposals, it would be much easier for us to go to the $21 per hour threshold.
Go back a slide. That's basically what.
Yeah, so what we wanted to make sure we showed you all, the request obviously was that minimum salary. I heard request all up to 23, and then obviously the last couple of years ago has been to get all employees no lower than 20. So we wanted to make sure you all had a snapshot of what it would look like, and we appreciate Jemiah's work to show you the total cost of what it would take to get us to a couple different places.
So can I ask a question, please? How do you
Yeah.
do this?
Well, so I
have questions.
and I'll come back to you and then Hugh, but I want to make sure I understand, what do you have projected in the budget right now?
At a minimum, everyone will be at $20 per hour, $41,600.
So that's what you have right now is 20. And then the step plan, everybody in the step system is 4%?
Well, we have bandied about different proposals, but yes, we're targeting 4%.
4% step plan across the board. And you said 21? Or 20?
So the two proposals would be either to go to 21 or to 23. We know that we'll have everyone at least at $20 or $41,600.
Sharon?
So, first of all, I'm concerned that we're really not focused on the 25 now. I'm seeing 4 or 5 years down the road for 25. That's a very bare minimum. But at least no less than 23, and which is what I want to see, 23. 21, you're talking $1 going from 20 to 21 in 25, 26?
No, again, keep in mind, we are at 1875 right now. So we're hoping at bare minimum is to go from 1875 to 20. If council wishes us to go further than that, we will. But we're at 1875 right now. We're not at 20 right now.
But
we
20
will
was,
get to
20 was the direction anyway, and so supposedly some people should be currently at 19 here. So they're right at that 20.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Virtually all of our
It's just a small
employees
number.
are already at 20.
So, I mean, if you're gonna make a significant difference in the lives of people, when you've done stuff in other departments, safety, public safety, you've gotten them up, just recently, we lost an employee who got murdered. He had been here 29 years and was making $32,000 a year. That's $16 an hour, 16.66. He wasn't even in. So if we're going to impact so that our employees are no longer working 2 and 3 jobs, we've got to make a significant investment in them. And for me, 23 would be at least the bare minimum that we should consider with that regard. And it also concerns me that it would take you 4 years, 29 to 30, and this is 25 we're in. It would take you even 4 years to get to 25.
Can we talk through what it would take? Can we go back to the slide after this? So that, I think that was the purpose of us preparing, so that you all can see. We want to get to those places also, but we wanted to make sure you saw, as we approach a total budget, what it would take for us to implement and get there. So we wanted to make sure when you saw that, when you asked for it, that you're comfortable with what it would take to get there. So as John and Marlene work out the other side of the budget, we can balance that out.
Well, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. So what is projected in the budget right now is at 20.
Correct.
And what we are anticipating is to get to the 21 as the suggested. But
And
then
you
going
get
back
to
to Sharon's,
25 in
to
5
get to
years.
25 in 5 years.
$1 a year.
So scale, okay.
We were given, from the conversations you had individually with the manager, he brought us that there were council members who were interested in seeing the numbers for 21 and 23. So that's what we have prepared. If council directs us to go to $21 an hour, on top of what's currently in the budget, we're going to have to find about $3.2 million.
Okay.
If council directs us to go to $23 an hour, we'll have to find roughly $29 million to add to the budget.
Right, so
Okay.
after, well, if Sharon's done, Hugh, Goldie, and then Zach, anyone?
Yeah, just a couple of quick questions. So looking at this screen here, we have the cost to implement and the cost to address. Those are two separate numbers, so we need to combine those two.
Yes,
To
correct.
make the difference.
Correct.
So next, with this year's inclusion of the $20 per hour, which will bring 69 employees up, and go back to the other slide for me. Right, and then targeting the 29-30. And I understand that we can encumber future councils when it comes to this, but did you do it in an illustrative chart of showing how do we get to 25, that is from next year, then the year following, and how does that look?
So we can create a pathway to try to forecast what the additional revenue needed to meet the new threshold each year. The difficulty that comes in is that last column, the cost to address compression, we could more easily raise everyone's salary to a new threshold. But as you all know, you will hear from longer tenured employees who say, well, I've been here for X number of years and they are hiring new people who are making what I'm making or close to it. So the challenge then becomes in us fashioning a strategy to address that inequity, that compression concern, and that's where it gets exponentially more expensive. But yes, we can work with the budget team and create a pathway from 25-26 to 29-30 and that $25 per hour.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, not only for the 20, but for all the different prices, but whatever they are, just for illustrative purposes. We start at 20, or we start at 21 or 23, getting to 25. Like others, I'm very interested in raising the salaries for our employees. 20 is not enough, and but I have to compare and contrast that with what is the cost going to be. So if we're looking at 23 right now, we're talking about an additional $27 million just for this bucket. We haven't gotten to the other buckets. You know, we're making sausage again. And so it just would be helpful to have those charts, and we can make that decision with more illustrative information, not guaranteed, but just illustrative information.
Are you saying that you want to look at the whole that 5 years?
Yes.
Dr. Wells and Zach.
Well, the road to 10,000, I don't know if our folks can even afford a house. And we're talking about how we want everybody to have to be able to get adequate, attainable housing. And the thing of worrying about what the folks who've been there will say about the folks who get it, we just tell them that we're looking after everybody. I mean, they've been there a long time, and the people coming in on the end, getting more money, that's just a human, just something to be upset about. But I don't think it makes too much sense because everybody needs to make a decent salary.
Well, also keep in mind that many of our employees, I would assume, have 2 income households.
You would assume that.
Yeah.
General
assumption.
Yeah, we make it,
So-
2 income,
If
plus
it's
they're
two-
doing 2 jobs extra.
If we get them to 43.7.
But even if you got 2 income in the household, if you're making bare minimum, even your 2 salaries aren't being as good as what one would be at a better rate and a more compensated rate. So you take 2 people to make one salary. It's still not enough. Particularly when we have an ability to impact the lives of our employees
I understand.
and citizens, and people keep talking about
Employees are our biggest asset.
we inundate areas of saturation of low income. But let's go look at who that low income is in those communities. A lot of them are city employees. Okay? And so we really need to look at this whole greater picture and the impact.
I feel the same way. And you have to slide something from one place to another, and there are some places that are kind of fluffy. You say the budget is tight, but anytime we need something, we find it.
Zach?
So, Mr. Manager, I think my greatest, the way this is starting off right now is we're picking, for lack of a better term, pet projects, things that are important to certain folks. We don't know where we are currently in the budget. We don't know what our estimated budget is for 25, 26. 26, 27, 27, 28, and so forth. So I think we're doing this a little bit backwards in the sense of we need to understand as a board where we are today, what is the estimated budget for next year, because then we need to look at this and say, okay, if you want this living wage at this price of $21 or $23, this is what it's going to be based on X amount of budget. Do you follow me?
Well, that's why I asked, what are the trade-offs
Yeah, I
what's in
mean,
the
like-
budget?
And that's why I asked for the illustratives.
Right. We need to know where we are, where we think we're going to be.
So, yeah, I apologize, and I think we put in order, so next up will be John Decker to talk about the general budget.
I think that's kind of important.
Well, and I will tell you, we apologize for that. I think our approach was to provide some of the highlights, some of the main things that you talked about first. So if you'll bear with Jemiah as he navigates through here, because again, this is one of the most important things to everybody. And then we can either rewind back. I may give Jemiah a break, not make him come back up, but Jemiah, if you continue on so we can have some context.
And if I can just speak to that, what you're saying, but at the same time, if you don't know what you got to work with, you don't know what the budget's going to be. If you hand me a budget that's bare minimum, then you're out there and say, here, this is the budget, $100,000, y'all go with it. That doesn't leave room for us to be able to make no adjustments. And I think we need to talk about those adjustments. You just talked about downtown, and so that's important. But at the same time, we got stuff that's important too, and I think that's part of this retreat as well, that we need to hear.
I don't disagree. I think what I'm saying is, if we know where we're at, then what we've done in the past budgets that I've been a part of is look at everything that we fund, and if we're gonna shift, you put it up on a table and we vote, the majority wins.
So let me reiterate. It feels like a budget presentation. It is not. This is a longer work session that we normally have, but we compacted it into a longer session to provide insight into. Now, we will get to those sessions just as what you're talking about. But again, this is really to give you all time to sit with, discuss, have these type of conversations with the things that are most important.
Then I apologize.
No, sir.
Do you want to ask that question?
After, exactly,
Input, yeah.
Mary Kay, then Jamila.
No, I just want to make sure we find, before we get off the screen, we answer Jamila's question.
Yeah, so,
Well, so Mary Kay, then
Okay.
Jamila.
Okay, so my question at this point, since we're still discussing everything, we did the big market study, correct? So on the positions that are in question that are not making 20, is that how we're looking at this, or is this just question, or just our wishes?
So the push for a living wage isn't really about market position.
Right, I understand.
It's this council's directive and really part of our values that we want to have a minimum salary that no matter what the market says, no matter what the duties of the job are, if you come to work for the city as a full-time employee, you will at least make a certain salary that you can support yourself and your family.
And that's the goal, but I was just curious, do we have everyone basically at market level, and then we're talking about making it above?
So I will tell you, not necessarily.
Okay, that was my question.
It varies by position. There are some positions that are at market and above market. This is really about maintaining a floor.
No, I understand that, but it is important to me to know that, we still have people who are not at market, and I know that we want to pay better than market. That's not my question.
Yes.
My question is, do we have everyone at market yet? So,
No.
You know where
Okay.
you work?
oh, yeah, there is.
No, it ain't no way in the world to get everybody that market. No way in the world.
Now, she's in that now.
No,
Yeah,
not
no.
even that. No way in the world.
If Mary Kay is through Jamila.
Well, it wasn't quite, but that's okay.
Well,
So no, go
no,
ahead.
go ahead. 'Cause-
I
No, go ahead.
I get cut off too.
No, go ahead.
No, not you. You just,
Right, Jamila?
go ahead, Jamil.
Yeah, so my question is, with this, I think Zach asked it in terms of, this is to get us to where we current state, so that we can understand where this kind of fits in as we continue, but I guess that's the next presentation. But with these numbers right here, that includes fringe benefits, and that, for that 20, at the 21 as well as the 23, or is that just?
Just salary.
It's just salary, and so I guess that goes back to the funding, where's the rest of the money gonna come to be able to support that, so that you can have an accurate number, but I guess that's gonna happen in the next conversation. Because, I get the 21 and I get the 23, but that's really not, it's not even a guesstimate, because you don't have the fringe in there to really know what number we're working with.
Yeah,
But-
we've made an effort in recent years to really communicate to employees the idea of their total compensation, to include things like deferred compensation, their retirement benefits, the value of the health insurance. But these numbers are just pure salary.
Just pure salary.
So you'd add another 30%
You
on
gotta
top
add
of that.
30 to that.
Yeah, it's between 30 and 40% depending on the type of position.
Well, you're doing insurance regardless of what the salary is. The
Right.
question is, what's the incremental cost of the, if we were to go up, say, $30 million, what's the incremental cost in retirement and those deferred compensation type benefits? That we're not talking about 30 million, are we really talking about 33 million because of
Yeah.
the retirement piece of it?
Yeah, again.
And that's about 10%,
No, the
14%.
14%?
and then total benefits, that total compensation is about 35%.
Right, but we're paying that regardless of what we're
Right.
paying, we're doing the health insurance and the life insurance. The big
Correct.
question to me is the incremental cost would be,
It shows up in things like paid time off.
Right.
It also shows up in things like
so that's
overtime rates.
14%.
Overtime becomes more expensive because the base rate
Right.
is now more expensive. So it does have that cascading effect. I couldn't see it today and give you
Right.
a number, but for sure.
I think when we are making these decisions, it would be helpful if we included, like, salary and then the incremental benefit costs, so that we could see, we're not really talking about taking 30 million out of the budget, we're really talking about taking 35 million out of the budget. And so that would be helpful to know going forward.
And you could also include that in your illustrative path.
So, most council is probably already aware of the fact that every 2 years, we engage an outside consultant to engage in what we call a benchmark survey, where we benchmark positions all across the organization to measure their market competitiveness. That work continues. However, staff recognize that public safety is obviously very important to this council, and so we decided to conduct an annual public safety salary survey in addition to those biennial surveys. So the People and Culture team worked with the public safety leads in designing a survey that would do just that. And we looked at 44 different job titles in Guilford Metro, fire, and police. Those 44 job titles covered about 1,200 positions. And we looked at the cities of Durham, North Carolina, Fayetteville, High Point, Raleigh, and Winston-Salem. And the data for that survey was current as of February of 2025, so pretty recently concluded. And we learned that most of our positions are in fact at or above market, and our salaries are in fact competitive.
Good.
But there are, as you can see here, 5 of 44 job classifications that were below market. 3 of them were in Guilford Metro 911. Those are the communication specialists, 1, 2, and master levels. And then there were 2 positions in police, crime scene investigator and evidence techs. Typically, what we would do when we have this information that a particular job classification is below market, we would look to regrade that position to a pay grade that matches the midpoint of the pay grade matches the market rate, or the 50th percentile of the data. And so any employee who was in that position would also receive a corresponding pay increase so that they don't fall behind in their new pay range. We've not yet met with Chief Thompson or Melanie Jones to go over this data or to decide how to implement it, but we wanted to share information that we now have an additional tool in our toolkit. We're not waiting every 2 years to get salary data. At least where public safety is concerned, we're committed to doing it annually.
So where it says all fire positions were at or above market, you know, I find this part of our budget kind of frustrating, and I've been through 20 budgets at this point. And, you know, it's that whole green zone and compa ratio and, you know, salary range starting at this and ending at that, and is actually this. So I think it might be difficult to say that 5 of the 44 were below market because the numbers are so squishy. You know, a couple of years ago, we had a discussion regarding police salaries. And, I mean, ultimately, I think we disagree with your departments. And please don't take it personally, but I think, you know, that when we looked at what our marketability was compared to other markets, that we were way off. And I think some of it is because of the way that the HR hiring numbers are kind of all over the place. Is my interpretation incorrect, or are you looking at actual hires in Greensboro compared to actual hires in other cities?
So here's what we do in a nutshell. So we'll say we have a job called Emergency Communication Specialist 1. And here is a summary of what this job does. And we provide just a paragraph or two to give the other communities a sense of what this job is. And we basically ask them, you tell us every salary that you pay to everyone who's doing this job, whether you call it Emergency Communication Specialist 1 or whether you call it something else. Tell us from the highest to the lowest, how much are you paying? And we do that for each of the 5 communities. And so we end up with this huge data set of salaries for everyone who's doing that work. And what we do is we look at the 50th percentile, the middle value of all of those data points. That number becomes what we consider to be the market value for that work. We want our internal pay range, we want the midpoint of our pay range to match that 50th percentile.
So, and thank you for that, because that does clarify it a bit. And I think that council has talked in the past that we don't want to be 50%, that we think it would be more reasonable to be at 75% or something else, because 50% really is pretty low. So if we're basing that 5 out of 44, but basing that on 50%, that doesn't give me a lot of confidence.
So it's really difficult to, but it's not the average. So the 50th percentile is, in the compensation world, it is a philosophy called matching the market.
But we also talked about matching, chasing,
leading
and
or lagging.
leading, and
Right.
we wanted
That's
to be
true.
leaders. We wanted to lead the market.
And that's a perfectly legitimate strategy. It's typically reserved for positions that are in short supply. If you have a really tight labor market and you're very competitive, you may decide to lead the market for a certain position because you have to. That's a legitimate approach. Most employers, private or public, will seek to match the 50th percentile. That's the most common approach. But it's totally legitimate, and then even in some cases, it's appropriate to lag the market. If you're getting thousands of applications for a job, that's an indication that perhaps there's an oversupply of talent, and you don't need to necessarily be, at the top end of the market in order to attract talent to your organization. But as we currently define competitiveness, only 5 of those 44 fill.
From the standpoint of competitiveness and determining that midpoint, we're using entirely internal data points.
No, so our data goes in as well as those 5 cities.
Okay, the 5 cities.
Durham, Fayetteville, High Point, Raleigh, and Winston-Salem. They get arrayed in a spreadsheet, and that middle point becomes the market value, and it becomes the midpoint for our pay range.
So if our internal Greensboro data points are low, but Durham, Fayetteville, Raleigh, and Winston are high, it drags our number up.
Yeah, so we're either way. If it's higher, it pulls it up.
Right.
If it's lower, but 1 out of 6 communities, it's going to be not that impactful. And I will tell you, we still have the biennial surveys, which includes more cities than just these 5. But we didn't want to wait 2 years to have fresh data.
And some of you will recall these type of pay studies used to include cities up and down the East Coast, and there would occasionally, the question would be, well, why do we really care what the police officer is making in Savannah, Georgia, or Lexington, Kentucky? So we started really narrowing in on what we sensed was our true competition market. So now for public safety only, correct me if I'm wrong, this annual survey is done just with cities in North Carolina that we consider ourselves to be in competition with for that talent.
So, you focus
Wait,
on that.
sorry, Sharon.
I was just gonna ask the question, do they do study on everybody?
Every 2 years.
There's 2 years for the rest of the organization.
But only this department, you do 1.
Well, three departments. out was those numbers were changing so fast that every other year data wasn't kind of worth the paper it was written on. There was a period where public safety salaries were just changing so quickly that we were concerned about even making decisions on 18-month or 24-month-old data.
Mary Kay?
Thank you. So on the, I don't know what number slide it is, it's not showing. 5 of 44 job classifications, we were just there. I don't think that all fire positions are at or above the market. I know battalion chiefs aren't.
So, based on the data of our survey, we don't believe that to be the case. So again, we're comparing the control point of our
But there's a compression issue,
classifications.
correct?
So that's kind of mixing
Yes.
a couple of issues. Market competitiveness is more external fairness, and compression is more about internal fairness. And so I do know that Chief Robinson is concerned about the gap between his non-exempt and exempt employees. So battalion chief is that first exempt, and captain is the last non-exempt. So that is something he has as a priority to address.
Right, because you have captains who are not wanting to go to battalion chief, although they are, well-versed and experienced in what they do, because the pay
They
is...
lose overtime.
No, they lose overtime, and there's no pay.
So it's
Extra
an
pay.
important issue, but it's separate than how we match up with these other communities.
Okay.
Both can be true at the same time. Both of those job classes can be competitive externally, and yet still have compression internally.
But when we're talking about public safety is our number one thing, and then, nobody wants to be a battalion chief, but because, and I'm sorry, it comes down to not only experience and what you do, and sure, everybody wants to be promoted, but when anybody's promoted, they're usually getting more money. So I understand the request is to me rather important.
And are we going to
Are we addressing it?
address that? That's the key here, I think.
So
That's
this presentation,
my conversation.
I know we're getting the overview, I
Well,
understand
and there's
that.
one more
Yeah.
slide.
Yeah, I understand that, yeah.
so staff has been made aware of a proposal, I think, first developed by the professional firefighters of Greensboro to reclassify fire engineers from the F03 pay grade to the F04 pay grade. And so this is just information that if council, should direct us to do that, how we would implement that change. So to do that, we would basically preserve the compa ratio for all of the fire engineers, and I will explain what that is. Basically, it is your position in the pay range. So if you were, let's say, at the midpoint of the F03 pay range, we would implement this so that you would be at the midpoint of the F04 pay range. That's called preserving the compa ratio so that you don't lose ground in your new pay range. So in order to do that, the fire engineers would each receive a 9.8% pay increase, and that takes about $800,000 to accomplish. The issue, though, is if we do that and do nothing else, there would be 100 or so fire engineers, making more than fire captains. And so in order to prevent that compression, we would have to add another $900,000 to next year's budget to bump those fire captains up so that none of them would be making less than the engineers. So a total cost of about $1.7 million to next year's budget.
Jemai, can you give us a breakdown, not now, but can you provide us later a breakdown of that number so we can understand it? Because I think the numbers that we received previously through the firefighters, and they're pretty good about their numbers, is significantly less. So I'd like to understand what the difference is
I can
in the two sets of numbers.
We can break it down, but I can tell you exactly what it is. So between each pay grade, whether it's in the fire salary structure, in the general step plan, or in the executive salary structure, there's something called control point progression, which is basically the increase from the lower control point to the higher control point. there's a 9.8% progression from F03 to F04. So if we're going to take everyone from F03 and put them in F04, each of them will get a 9.8% increase. So that's where the number comes from. Any other questions about that?
And then the people in 04 currently get the same increase.
Well, they're actually in F05,
Right, okay.
but they would be
They may
making
go
less
down.
than. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Okay, and we are also aware, staff is, of a proposal from the Greensboro City Workers Union. I think it's been a long-standing proposal of theirs to implement some form of hazard pay for positions that encounter physical risks or are exposed to harmful conditions. And so first I just want to say we recognize that every job is different, and there are some jobs that are perfectly safe. I'm sitting behind a computer all day long. But there are other jobs that require a lot of physical effort and are frankly dangerous. And so when we evaluate these jobs, we grade them and we assign them to a particular pay grade with a salary range. We are evaluating the job across a number of factors. And one of those factors is whether or not the job has physical risks inherent in it. So to that extent, we feel, paying these workers for the hazards that they face. But if council should direct us to, we would create a hazard pay incentive that would be reserved for just those positions that are inherently dangerous. And so we would ask the departments to designate those positions, and then they would be reviewed by the People and Culture Department for consistency and just to make sure that they're genuine. And we don't yet know how many positions that would include or how many employees would be impacted. But we have a framework of a policy that we could implement should council direct us to do so.
So Jamai, you said something, you said you think, you said that these we think, but you do market studies for everybody else.
Yes, ma'am.
Run out here, gotta get this control point. Why are we not talking to the people that impact? The water sewer people that go underground and fix these pipes where gas lines are running by them. So why are we not having, I've had them, so why are we not having them already? Because that's other data, subset information that we already know and not be a supposition. We think you're behind a computer. I'm not going down in that cold water. I'm not going by that gas line that's running underground. That line that's potentially can explode and blow up in certain gas. Yeah, they put a hazmat outfit on. That doesn't stop you from dying if something happens. So I think that's something we need to make sure we have actual fact, data, information on. Because hazard pay is important, that we not just factor it into what you think is their risk factor, but what is the risk factor and how's that?
So I'm sorry, Jamila, let me answer real quick. A lot of what Jamai said is based on his conversations, my conversations, and other managers' conversations with that staff. So what we're seeking to do, similarly, it's tough to compare when you talk about like the salary ranges, because the identification of what's hazardous, there's really no template out there. So what they're proposing that People in Culture do is essentially create that so that we can have some consistency when folks come into those jobs. Like right now, you might have someone who does work in one of those positions, and that pay may be slightly increased, but we've heard folks say, look, these things are dangerous. And I agree with you. I mean, to some of the jobs that our folks perform, the functions are dangerous. So what they're proposing we do is not just blanket. It'd be really tough to categorize it. So we'll work with, I'm looking over at Kenny McDowell. I know some of your folks will be in that. And so those department heads will help Jemiah identify what those positions are, what those hazardous positions are, so that beyond us and into the future, we will identify a consistent pay type for that. Am I saying that right, Jemiah?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I have Mary Kay, then Jamila.
So, knowing that, yes, there are certain hazardous jobs, and yes, they should be compensated for having to do those, have we, I'm sure you are starting to look into what some other high-profile cities are doing in this regard. So, you know, how do you designate which is which, I guess is part of my question.
We haven't gotten that far, but I can tell you, I've tried my best to benchmark cities that have hazard pay, and it's not very common here in North Carolina. You might have some special teams, like you know, fire has their hazardous materials team. Police may have, I think they have a special operations team. They have certain additional requirements of them. They can be called back at different times, and of course, they have faced enhanced risks as part of the duties that they perform. But outside of that, there are not many examples close to home. That doesn't mean to say that we cannot implement hazard pay, but to Councilmember Hightower's point, I'm not necessarily the one most qualified to do that. We would work very closely, if this was council's direction, with the operating departments to really pinpoint which of these positions encounter legitimate
More
routine
chemicals, more,
risks that
toxins.
cannot be mitigated. And so
Right.
those are the, you know, we definitely will take their expertise
Oh,
on
good.
building
Yeah.
any kind of incentive.
That's good, thank you.
Jamila?
Well, she asked the question I had was, what was, if there wasn't a standard, because I'm not saying that the department doesn't have it, but who else is somewhere in other industries that you could pull from to be able to do that as a stepping stone?
Yeah, I don't think it's that common of a policy. I think typically when you are evaluating positions and you're classifying them, you're going to look at a number of things like budget impact, supervisory scope, the complexity of the job, and physical risk. And so most HR professionals will tell you, yes, of course, we're paying for this, but it's baked into our overall evaluation of the position.
So I think that's what I heard Trey saying, is that the job position takes into consideration hazard, where I think, are you talking, Sharon, about hazard pay? Like during COVID, we did a hazard pay increase for that specific reason. So are you looking at it on more of a case-by-case basis, or?
Yeah, but actually, you know, when you say it's baked into the income, how is it baked into the income?
Well, I can't answer
And
that.
right, and so that's something that we're sitting here don't know. What an employee does. So you're saying, well, your hazard pay, you can go down into the manhole and go by the gas line, but you get $17 an hour is baked in there. That's not how that we need to be categorizing and looking at how that hazard pay really impacts that position of going down into those manholes, the sewer holes, and places where we're expecting them, and we pat them on the back when they fix that water break. But yet, they've been down in that cold water for 5 to 6, 7 hours. So, and putting themselves in that condition. So more or less that than just baking it into a position of saying, oh yeah, this particular salary has hazard conditions baked into them. And so it's hazard pay and talking to the workers and then understanding there is hazard pay in other areas as well, because they have the comparisons. This is why I'm saying have a really, really in-depth talk to them, because they've looked at that, and there is hazard pay in other markets, and in North Carolina that they've looked at.
So I'll say this, so for this topic, I think what I want you all to recognize is we're actually pushing harder to create something additional that's really not out there. And so we've heard you all, we've heard the staff that are in these situations. So we really are, trudging into new territory, creating something, showing that we care about the staff and when they're in these conditions. So
It's also my understanding that there have been some preliminary conversations, at least with some council members, about whether or not to unwind the general employee step plan and to revert back to the merit system. And so for those who maybe don't know, I just want to briefly describe what the STEP plan is. A STEP plan is one where employees receive scheduled and predetermined salary increases. The amount is predetermined, as opposed to the merit system where managers in the various departments have discretion and latitude within, an overarching budget to recommend different increases for employees based on their performance. If council directs, our staff can certainly work over the next year to unwind the general employee step plan and put those employees on the traditional, I say with air quotes, plan where they receive merit increases as determined by their departments and not predetermined salary increases. Questions about that?
What are you hearing from the employees?
That's what we're talking about.
They want,
Do
they want to
want to
unwind it.
They want to unwind them.
They
What was
don't,
the purpose of going to the step plan in the first place?
Because they complain. They
They
can't
complain, so
complain.
everybody, I voted against
So just to give you,
My boss doesn't like me, so I don't get it.
I'll speak to this because I voted for it.
Well, I did. Go
Um,
ahead, Oscar.
there were a lot of us that voted for it,
Yes,
but,
we did.
it was majority. But the employees were very concerned about the fairness
Right.
of the compensation system. And they requested to go to the step plan. And, Larry and Jemiah and others tried to talk us out of it, quite honestly, because they kind of figured that we would get to this point. But the point is, it's not working, and if it's not working, we need to fix it.
That's right.
And
So the fairness issue's been addressed?
No.
Well, they think it's, maybe they think.
no, they just feel like this is more unfair.
Yeah, I don't think
And I think part of it,
realize the implications.
yes, I think so, and I think, quite frankly, in at least one area, there is a different supervisor in the area, and I think there was a supervisor that was, a lot of their employees were driving this issue, and I think that has been addressed. And so what they're left with is not working, and, sometimes you try things, and if they don't work, and then you need to change it, and admit that we,
I think
I don't
part
think it's
of,
so much that it didn't work, I think they have a better understanding.
Of how it
the
works.
Evaluation system.
and so it may have worked in some of that regard, but I think the other thing was also, they're not taking into consideration that, some employees had been here long, and so the staff was making employees equal, is what they knew, and so that was the other issue. We did not take into consideration the employees that had been here longer, and so how that step was gonna impact. So, and the step plan that we implemented was not like the step plan the fire people did, and all of that either. So, that was the other part of it. So it wasn't just that it wasn't working, it's because we did not look at how we created those.
this is another example of some of the challenges sometimes, because all the departments are not apples to apples. So it does work for a police and a fire system because of the way just your natural attrition and taking new positions like we talked about, fire captains, fire engineers, and so on and so forth. But if you're in a department in a position and it's the grade may be flat, and there may not be as much opportunities to continue to elevate or increase, then that step plan may not work the same as it does for a police officer.
exactly.
But again, this is really great, because this is not great that we need to address the issue, but it's great that you all are kind of working through this, because you can kind of see the challenges and the dynamics of managing the different types of departments, and I applaud people in culture for navigating through that.
And last is consideration of whether or not to reinstate service bonus for our newer employees. So just a bit of history. Back in 2010, when Rashad Young was our city manager, we ended what was then called longevity pay, such that employees hired on or after July 1, 2010 were no longer eligible for longevity pay. The longevity pay program was one that would pay employees a percentage of their current salary based on how many years of service they had with the city at that time. And so we now call this program the Service Bonus Program. And this fiscal year, we paid out a little over 1.3 million to 1,000 employees roughly. The amounts, again, based on a percentage of salary, ranges from a few $100s to almost $13,000. And so if council does direct us to implement a service bonus program for the newly hired employees on or after July 1, 2010, we would most likely suggest a revamped bonus program that would apply to about 1,000 employees, additional employees. It would not be a percentage of salary most likely. We would instead put forth a fixed amount based on years of service so that recipients would receive the same amount regardless of what their position is in the organization or what their salary is. If we're rewarding service or length of service, we would treat everyone the same in that particular category. We estimate the cost of that new program would be anywhere between $300,000 to $500,000. Again, additional money in next year's budget.
Is that per year?
It would be ongoing, yes,
In
sir.
perpetuity?
Well, here's the thing, and I misspoke. We have to be careful about how we talk about the program because we don't want to somehow use language that makes it contractual in any way. It's a discretionary bonus, and so the manager each year declares whether or not we're going to have a service bonus, and if so, when it will be paid out.
So it's a retention bonus that year to year can be implemented, but everybody who's eligible gets that additional amount of funding.
That's correct.
And so you said only cost, I saw that last night.
300 to 500.
Yeah, I saw it last night. I read the whole presentation last night. So I'm looking at that. That seems a small amount of money, less than half a year to implement.
So part of that is because it's only applying to people
The
hired
newer people.
after 2010
Right.
and also have 5 years of service. So it's a smaller subset of the organization.
And so we're currently already anyway doing it for those who came prior to 2010.
Prior to 2010, they do receive it. After 2010, they do not. Yes.
So it's in the budget now for the people prior to.
Who have like 20 years experience.
Right.
I'm not sure exactly what that number is, but it's
Right.
really for veteran employees who are included in the budget right now.
Right, and so what I'm saying is it's already there. So 300,000 to 500,000
It's new
seems
dollars.
to me a
It's an-
no-brainer
it's
to
an
add.
addition. It's an addition.
But it seems a no-brainer to just add. If you're gonna talk about retaining employees and keeping them here, because let me tell you something. We got competition now. Toyota, boom, Supersonic, whatever that 10,000 job company is coming. We got competition. Okay? So the people can walk out the door at any moment. And we need to be able to say to them, we value you as employees here. You already tell police and fire that you do in 911. Let's speak collectively about it. And so to me, 300 to 500,000 is not much to say, well, okay, you've been here 5 years. Obviously 5 years is when you're vested anyway. So that they don't hightail it down to Toyota. I mean, Toyota hire people, I don't want to hire city. Seems right. I mean, you don't. So that's my position on it.
Tammy Zach Hugh.
This $300,000 to $500,000, is that, how did you you envision that program? Is it something that's paid out every year, or do you qualify for those bonus every 5 years, or what it,
Once a year.
how does that,
It would be
everybody gets it once a year?
once a year at a common date. There would be one fixed sum for employees with 5 but less than 10 years. Another fixed sum higher for those with 10 but less than 15. And because it was 2010, those are really the only 2 categories we have to deal with at this time.
Isn't it based on their salary, though? They get a percentage of their,
Currently,
The old
that is
way,
how we
yes.
do it.
so you don't want to do it the same way?
I wouldn't recommend doing it that way for the reasons I kind of touched on. Is if we're, for example, if we're paying someone executive comp or night shift or bilingual skills, we don't base it on the percentage of the salary. We say we're incentivizing this particular thing in this particular amount. If you have someone who's been working for the city for 20 years, should my 20 years of service be rewarded more because I'm a higher earner than a 20-year solid waste operator? Those are questions ultimately council can decide, but my recommendation would be a fixed amount based on years of service.
Based on my corporate exposure, and I realize this is a totally different animal, but what I have seen done is a higher fixed amount, but it's done every 3 years or every 5 years.
Clawback if they leave, or?
No, it's once you've been here 5 years, on your 10th year, you get a much higher number. On your 15th year or 13th, whatever that number is, you get a much higher number. I think I'd like to see what that might look like, because I think you have can have more of an impact, because you can increase that amount that the person gets. And quite frankly, if I've been here 3 years and I know at 5 years I'm going to get a big bonus, that has more incentive to me than getting a $500 bonus every year. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And I'd just be interested in looking at what would that look like, and what would you propose if we did it that way. I think it's a way to give more money to employees and incentivize. I know one company I worked for, we did it annually, and you had turnover the month after annual bonuses were paid. You know, it's like, I'm thinking about leaving, but I'm not going to leave until I get my longevity bonus. Whereas if you spread it out every several, over a number of years and make the bonus larger, that helped the longevity a little bit more. So I think that's something that I would like to look at.
I hear what you're saying, but if it's done for employees that have been here after 5 years, typically, I think the mindset is they aren't gonna leave after they get here.
Well, but we have lots of employees leave after 5 years.
Because, but a lot of them just wait to get vested. All they wanna do is get vested. Them 5 years invested is what says then they go somewhere else. Because they can take that vesting, go to another state agency.
Well, I'm just saying, my experience is in the corporate world that it makes a big difference in retention, whether you do it annually with a smaller amount or every interval years with a larger amount. Just want to see what it looks like. We can discuss it.
Okay.
Yeah. Zach?
Jemiah,
Yes.
tell me again, and I was here, but what was the thought process in doing away with this?
Oh,
Because I think history needs to be heard.
Yeah, I believe it was fiscal.
It was
In
fiscal.
nature, so I was here as well. There were really 2 changes. Basically, the first change was, those of you who are already here, you're frozen wherever you are. And so, not that you care, I am frozen on the 1% of salary step, and did not get the opportunity to graduate to 2, 3, 4, or 5%, even though I'm still here. But it also ended it for new employees after July 1, 2010. There is another argument that says paying for longevity isn't necessarily consistent with paying for performance. And so just because you're here and you didn't get fired, doesn't necessarily mean that that was the best use of that money when you look at the overall employee package. So I think it was probably those two.
And I would agree with that. In my opinion, you know, if you're here 20 years and you're a good employee, you have risen up through the ranks and your salary and compensation has risen up through the ranks. Thus, your, what's the thing that I don't have at the state when you retire, Chris? What is it?
Pension.
Pension. Yeah, you pension. So if I've been here 10, 15 years, no offense, I ain't leaving to go to a startup company and lose my pension. I want us to keep my pension and keep it going as up as possible. And, you know, I'm just looking at longevity, and just because you've been here 20 years, I mean, I've never, in any corporate job I've ever had longevity pay.
I never got either.
It just doesn't exist. Of course, I don't have a pension either. So we're talking about all this stuff. Still don't know how it relates to the whole budget. Because I think if I did the math right now, we're damn near $50 million added to a budget that I don't even know what the budget is. So I don't see this happening. And as far as hazard pay, just going back to that, I could argue a lot of jobs in hazard pay. You know, we lost 2 officers that are not on that special forces group. Every officer, every public service person is hazardous. So I don't think the math on that is right as well. And so there's a lot more substance behind these requests than what we're even breathly covering, although we have beat these pretty good. So I don't support this.
I assume that we could eliminate the longevity pay that exists currently. We eliminated it before. How much of that? How much
Over
of
there,
that?
Dave's
No,
dead. It
was a fiscal thing, and if you were in the program, you got to stay in the program.
We just didn't have
But
any.
all new hires were hired without it.
Right.
So there's
It's
still
not exactly
a number
fair.
of employees who are in the longevity. But as I said, I call them veteran employees. By
How many
veteran,
are remaining?
and then long time.
1,000 are left.
1,000 employees.
So we've lost
So
2,700.
well less than half of the workforce is still eligible.
They just don't have the longevity.
Right.
Well, that's all that I have prepared.
Just one more question.
Zach's done the
One more question. And this is really for my clarity. So already we have the $1.3 million baked in for the 1,043 employees, and that's going to continue. I presume that number is a stable number?
So
It's going down.
if,
Going down.
if the manager decides to award the service bonus, we would have funding to do it.
Right. And then, so incrementally, we're looking at another potentially 300,000 to 500,000 for those hired after July 2010.
Right.
And so it's 1.3 now, it could be 1.6 or 1.8 on a downward trend as folks leave and they don't have it. Okay.
Well, it wouldn't be, sorry. When the program was sunset in 2010, we were probably at 7, 8, 9 million a year for this. So over time, as eligible people leave and folks who are not getting it take their jobs, the number comes down. So, but now if we recreate something that says all employees going forward will get something, it will never get to zero. The goal in 2010 was this program will one day go away. Sooner or later, everyone who is eligible will leave the organization. It may take 35 years, but sooner or later, this program will go to zero. Because everyone who was eligible as of that date, sooner or later, will leave the organization.
Right. And then my next point is that I understand Tammy's point about having the longer string, so to speak. Maybe it's a 3-year window so that the employee has to, in a sense, do the math. You know, I'm 1.5 years in. I have another 1.5 to go. to get to that retention bonus, which should be worth it. Someone's trying to attract my attention, but I'm thinking I'm having to analyze. But then going to Sharon's point, if we do our jobs right here, and we've been doing a darn good job of bringing jobs in, there's going to be a lot of attention for our employees, and they're going to be pulled away from us. And so maybe the shorter string is the deal, but those are the things that I'm thinking about. That longer string, making them think about it, but the shorter string to make sure that we have the employees we need to get the job done as a public service entity.
But on the other hand, you know, if it's a couple $100 every year, no
Well,
one's gonna stay for a couple $100.
No.
Oh, it's a couple hundred. I'm sorry, I was focused on that 13,000 I heard.
But that's only
Right,
for
that's
the
all
other,
Yeah, that's for,
Down.
yeah.
Right.
Right, Mary Kay, and then
I think, oh, sorry.
Good. So I know this is all preliminary, right? But could we please look at, we have an issue with our firefighters about cancer. And I didn't know if, you know, a lot of them are experiencing cancer, and having had a child who went through cancer, I'm really passionate about this to see, because there are some blood tests and ultrasounds that could be done at a nominal fee. And I don't know if anyone's talked to United Healthcare yet about that, but I would be interested because, you know, if you can catch the kind of cancer that they get early, we're not going to be spending all that money on insurance. You see what I'm saying? So it would be cost effective to look into that, because, you know, I found out that what my son had many years ago could have been caught very early with a simple blood test, but we didn't know.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if we can incorporate just looking at that.
Yeah.
And then maybe not even every firefighter every year, just maybe those who've been here 3 years and then move on up, because I know it's less than $1,000.
I know there was work in the General Assembly to establish a rebuttable presumption
Right.
for firefighters who develop cancer, that it would be considered on-the-job injury or illness. I'm sure if that passed.
It did.
It did pass.
Right, it did.
Okay.
But I think what Mary Kay is
But
referring
prevention.
to.
Testing.
Prevention, yeah.
And I think right now they can get tested every 3 years. I think the thought was to do that every year.
Right.
That way you can catch it early.
Let me research that, yeah. But
Yeah,
we'll look into it for
At a
sure.
nominal fee, and, you
Okay.
know, we do know that that's prevalent, and, you know, I do know that, and the mayor has researched that as well, that, you know, the outer clothing, their gear,
Right.
there's nothing that prevents that from seeping into their skin, so, just wanted to put that out there.
We'll do it.
I thought that had been being worked on anyway.
The PFAS and the
Yeah,
equipment.
But there's no equipment.
Right, we know that.
Yeah,
We
that's
know
what I'm saying.
That's why it's important.
That's why it's
for them
important to
get
have the
tested.
test. Yeah.
Seems like if you got insurance, this needs to be getting fixed every year.
No.
it's not covered.
It's
It's
not
currently
covered.
not covered as a standard test.
That's why I asked for them to talk to United Healthcare. No, not that one.
And
That's
it's-
another
It's a
marker on the test.
specific
Yeah,
marker.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you. I figured, Trey, if we do 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Now, next up, John Decker.
Yeah, mine will be in the back end, sorry.
sorry.
We've been this for 12 years, no, sir.
We don't like $20 an
We
hour.
don't even make minimum wage.
Yeah, we didn't hear about it plug in.
Come on, Mike, recoup what I've lost.
Yeah, really.
That's a discretionary. Yeah, see, I'm married at 2011, so I'm here at 07. I get it.
So I'll turn this next portion over to Larry Davis to kick us off with our budget drivers and challenges.
If we just wanted to end before 4 o'clock, I mean, that'd be all right to say.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. So I'm going to open up the first slide and then turn it over to the team that's here, Marlene, John, and Tiffany. So this slide here may look familiar to you. We showed you a version of this at our work session at the Coliseum earlier this year. That one was purely retrospective, looking at the past. At the time, we were showing you that over the last 3 years, both the revenues and expenditures have been growing, and the gap between them was getting closer and closer. Our revenues were growing, but our expenditures were growing faster. And you saw that the two lines came close to convergence for fiscal year 23-24. At the time we shared this chart with you back in February, we weren't ready to give you a 24-25 projection, but today we are. So for the year that we'll be finishing up in just a couple months, you see now that we see now that unfortunately the blue line has caught the red line. Our projections for 24-25 is that we will actually have slightly higher expenditures than we have revenues in the general fund. It's happened before, hasn't happened in the last few years, but that's our best guess at this point. Looking at a gap, an operational gap somewhere in maybe the 5 to 7 million range before we finally close the year out. Obviously, it's not in any one given year. That's that's survivable. It's just not sustainable. You can't have that happen year after year after year. In the short term, this will mean probably a slight reduction to our fund balance when we close the year out. There are other things that feed into the fund balance number, so you can't automatically say that. A portion of it has to deal with what are our encumbrances that we carry forward into the next year, and we won't know that for a few more months. But what we wanted to share that with you now, let you know that we are doing everything we can, including the manager's hiring freeze and some other cutbacks that we're trying to keep departments to on these last 60 days to mitigate that gap as much as we can. So I'm going to step back now, and the bulk of this presentation will be John and Tiffany from Budget and Evaluation and Marlene from Finance. Thank you, team.
Thank you, Larry. Wanted to share a little bit more context of the graph on the previous page. So since 21-22, expenditures have increased about 28%, while total revenues have increased only 23%. So that shows the difference in those lines there, where we end up with some divergence and revenues not covering expenditures. On average over those years, expenditures have increased about 8.7% annually, while revenues have increased about 7.1% annually. Again, further indications that gap will continue to increase, at least from the averages we've seen annually for expenditure and revenue growth. And we'll get into the reasons why for some of those in the next few slides. Quickly, to summarize some of the information that we talked about during Jemiah's presentation, I just wanted to be clear about what's, at least at this point, preliminarily included for the 25-26 budget. It does include the starting pay at $20 per hour. That's about an 8.1% change from our current $18.50 per hour. Police and fire starting salaries would remain the same because we aren't looking at doing structural adjustments at this point. And again, based on some of the recent public safety survey data, we believe we are within market, at least as far as goes with fire and police pay.
I have a question on that. starting pay won't change.
Correct.
But police and fire in the ranks, that will be adjusted.
Yeah,
But starting pay is gonna stay the way it is.
Yes, as of right now, the preliminary budget keeps it the same, and the next little box there, the general preliminary 25-26 includes that 4% steps for those that are on the STEP program, as well as a 4% merit or COLA for those that are.
Is that 4%? It's everybody's 4%.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
what I'm
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, as it stands right now,
Anybody on the
4%
step
for everybody.
Okay.
And
So,
just,
what about those that are currently on the step that are coming, we're talking about coming off?
We
So-
would
They
do that this
still
year.
want 4%?
Yeah, the budget as it stands now doesn't anticipate any changes to the general employee STEP program. But since we already have planned matching merits of 4%, essentially it would not have a negative impact one way or the other, whether it was a STEP or an on average merit, if that makes sense.
the only real difference, council member, is if you're in a step plan, the steps are already 4% apart. So when we say there's 4% for a step, means you're moving one step. So we're preliminarily assuming that movement in the budget at this point. Even though the budget's not done, and even though the budget's not balanced, we're assuming that we can take, for those who are in a step plan, you can take a step, and that will be 4%. For those of us who are in the merit plan, we're budgeting average 4% merits. Now keep in mind, if you're in the merit plan, you get evaluated by your supervisor, which means you might get 4%, you might get better than 4%, you might get less than 4%. That's the merit plan. But right now, we're hoping to be able to have enough so that average merits for all those who are in the merit program would be 4%. Is that right, John?
So that's why I wanted to go to STEP, and I still, because I think it's still gonna be unfair unless you bake in a fairness policy. Because until that happens, that's gonna be the problem, with merit. Okay? Because whether you perform or not, if you my buddy, I'm gonna give you 4%.
I am your buddy. Give
And
me
so
4%.
you gonna get it all regardless, even if you say I feel sick one day out of every 5, and you don't come to work. That's the reason we went to a step plan, to make it fair. Now you're talking about unwinding it.
Not in this budget.
Not in this budget.
This budget, they will remain on the step plan. There just isn't enough time to unwind.
Right, and that's the reason I'm asking, because if,
Yes.
okay, so the next year, which we may find a way to make it work next year. And I say we count, but it could work if we do some other things in the step plan. But, okay, so it's gonna stay that way this year,
Yeah,
25, 26.
Apparently
Yes.
so.
Yeah. So the previous presentation, what Jemiah did was provided a couple options. You know, do we eliminate it automatically to go back to predetermined, 4% merit, or do we enable a merit-based pay raise tied to performance, or departments have a greater flexibility for higher performing employees in that? So, yeah, it sounds like if there's a consensus that we stay with it and identify a plan for the next year, then that's what we'll do. Sorry, John. Thank you.
No, absolutely not. I appreciate that. One thing that's not up there, but it is related to compensation, I did want to highlight is, and it came up in the previous conversation as well, is the impact of salary increases on the retirement contribution, and then the compounding impact of the increased rate that the city has to provide. So the adopted rates for next year are increasing again, as has been expected over the last several years. But the impact of the city has been well over $9 million and expected to be closer to $10.5 million since that 21-22 timeframe. Currently, rates are double what the employees contribute. So just put that in context as well. All salary increases impact retirement contributions. Looking at some other expenditure categories, wanted to highlight some of these just to again give you some context on what's pushing those expenditure growth amounts. These are just a few just sort of picked out to show you some of the larger impacts. Street lighting, huge increase there. This is just over 1 year, right? So this is not looking planned, known ED incentives that we've agreed to. It's just, they're now coming online where we expect to pay them. That would be for things like public. Any questions about that or any other categories you might want to bring up?
Yeah, can you talk about the building and grounds category? What exactly is that? And it's M&O we're talking about.
Yes.
So this building and grounds, does that encompass every building we own? Parks and rec buildings, rec centers?
So this is going to be our contracted buildings and grounds maintenance for all of our general fund related buildings. So it would include all of our contracted maintenance for parks and recreation centers, libraries, all the other facilities in the general fund.
And so all the deferred maintenance that we have doesn't factor in any of this, I guess.
No.
But.
Well, there is some increase there, it just doesn't tackle, and Kenny will speak to this more, I'm getting into his role a little bit. I mean, we are looking at a 30% increase, but in many cases, that's just driven by the cost of maintaining what we already have. It isn't that we're doing 30% better maintenance, Kenny, is that fair?
Yeah, and I have a little more detail on mine a little bit later.
I thought we had agreed to take the incentives line out of this chart because it's a little misleading since it's almost really a rebate. And there's nothing we can do about the incentive payment.
That's, yes, we
And
acknowledge that.
I thought that's what we had discussed at the work session, to take that line off.
It will be stricken from all future presentations.
Yeah, because that was going to be my next question, what the incentive is.
Yeah, and it essentially can work like a rebate. The hard part is we sort of got to prepay it in some ways. So at least looking expenditures versus revenues, it is a key expense driver. It is and can help increase some of the revenue growth, but as we saw, overall revenues aren't keeping up the pace with expenditure growth. So,
But
those two sides.
on that note,
Yeah.
same with the parking fund, right? We receive revenue for those two holistically. So on those two items, I would say, there's an offset. So on those two, you really need to have revenue and expenditures. And I think I said that last year when we would talk about all this stuff.
Yeah, parking fund, that's pretty easy to represent. This would essentially be above and beyond all revenues considered in the parking fund.
So that's a net number.
Yes, essentially, yeah. The parking fund as a separate fund, we would deal with it. The general fund support would be that net number. For ED incentives, it gets quite a bit more complicated to try to, tease out the specific revenues that are driving. Obviously, property taxes, right? But a lot of these ED agreements also consider the sales tax impact and others. So to get us real specific in that number, it would be fuzzy at best and probably not capture the whole picture.
My concern with having it on there is that the average person who doesn't look at the budget and doesn't really understand incentives will look at that as a huge increase of what, not realizing that there are revenues on the back end and that it is complicated. There are clawbacks and everything else. So I could see some people looking at that 2.4 and misinterpreting what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand that as part of the need for educating, and this is just looking on the expense side. So. And Marlene is going to talk a little bit more about the debt service expenses as well.
Right, so the debt service area is one of the larger areas of general fund support, and typically has been in the plus 40 million range. That's our kind of our core support, about 11 cents of the property tax rate. So this would be going for our referendum, still the 2016, and then now the 2022 referendum is in full swing. And so, and we also did a few limited obligation mention this too. So we have public safety radios, police and fire radios, some breathing apparatus for fire. Used to be on a lease, and so those were in that M&O line, and now we finance those with bonds, and so they're just kind of categorized now as debt service. So that's why some of the increase in the fund is just kind of recategorizing things that were previously leased that we actually financed. So,
Things that are leased, you mean?
like for public safety radios, typically Motorola has a lease
things
program.
like that.
Yeah, so we didn't go with the Motorola program. We just actually financed ourselves with bonds, the program. So it's categorized in the individual. It used to be in an M&O, now it's a debt service on the actual department. So
I'm sorry, Ron, just one other thing, if you'll go back to that slide, I asked them to add the little box there to the right, just to document. Debt service is a little bit easier to project because it's based on known borrowing plans. We know what years, typically when we're going to borrow the money that's been approved. So I did want you to see that debt service contribution number is steady and actually slightly increasing in the budget for the next several years. But that's not in and of itself a bad thing. It's a reflection of the fact that we are borrowing on a continuous basis and implementing those 126 million bonds from 2016 and the 135 from 2022.
I have a bond question. I don't know if it fits right here or not. So you just talked about the most recent bonds. When we borrow money on those bonds, when we release, I have a concern that, well, maybe this is not how I want to say this. So we release that money out. We borrow that money. That money goes out. But there's some money that's just sitting. And so we're paying on that money, but it's not being used. Okay? That first $8 million that went out of the 22 housing bond, $5 million of it still sitting. But yet we borrow on that money. But that money has not been spent.
And
That's an issue to me. If we're going to borrow on it, we should be spending, but it should not just be in some holding pattern somewhere.
that when we try to plan how that's going to happen, we have to try to work with the departments and say, hey, is your project ready? What are your plans for it? And it seems that we don't match it perfectly on some cases. Sometimes we do, but on cases where it just isn't known, and then it's delayed, and then that exactly, you're correct, that happens.
Yeah, that $5 million is still sitting, and we borrowed on first one. So, I mean, what is our obligation? How do we claw that back, I guess is the word.
And I will tell you that if, let's say we have, like the 2022 bonds had 15 million in it for transportation. And let's say Marlene had scheduled 3 different sales, 5, 5, and 5. Well, if we get to that third 5, and you haven't spent the first 2 5s, you don't get your third 5. I mean, we just don't borrow the money until the cash is really necessary. Because you're absolutely right. We don't want to start paying interest. We don't start paying back money that isn't doing anything. So we do, Marlene is actually very conscientious about that. But you're right, we do have some housing bonds borrowed that haven't gone anywhere.
No, they haven't. It's time to get it back.
And we have other bond projects that are ready. We can also shift the bond projects as needed to make sure that money is spent as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you, sorry, I just felt like we need to address that because it doesn't make sense to pay on something we haven't really truly utilized.
What have we not issued from 2016 at this point?
So 2016 is fully issued.
It's fully issued, okay, all right,
Issued,
all right.
and
Okay.
not much left then on the 2022, so there's a little bit more to come on that. So, our last slide is, been talking about some of the challenges and drivers on the expense side. This is our revenue discussion, and in this case, it's actually, I think, more challenging on the revenue because we have less control in some of these categories than we can on the expense side. And so our three main sources of revenue account for 90% of all general fund revenues. So these three are property tax, our sales tax, that's our local option sales tax, and then also there's some intergovernmental revenues, like the state assesses some taxes on utilities and piped gas, telecommunications, and then they share those with the city. So 90% is made up of these three. And in all cases, except the utility sales tax, everything is very slow in fiscal 25 and what we're projecting for 26. Slow growth and not really any kind of a bounce back in 26 from what we're seeing. And so on the property tax, which is the largest share, about 60%, it's very stable and you can predict it fairly well. Guilford County does an excellent job in collecting. Like right now we're over 99% collected for our fiscal 25 collections. So you can grow your property tax usually in two ways, just raising your tax rate, your actual property rate, or your underlying assessed value. So for example, if you brought in a lot of industry, a lot of commercial development or residential development, and you just get more properties added to the rolls. Or another way is on the motor vehicle. So on our when we do our tax and tagging, when we register our motor vehicles, we pay our taxes. When people are buying more and more new cars versus higher value cars than a used car, that can alter your growth. So what we're seeing when we don't raise our taxes, which we didn't do in 25, then it relies on just your generic underlying adding of new properties, new improvements to your rolls, and that usually grows 1.5 to 2%. Over my entire time I've been here, it's historically been that, just average increasing on the underlying assessed. So economic development certainly helps that and will help that. It's more like a longer term look at it. So our next revaluation is going to be for effective in 27. So they'll start assessing in 26 and then it will be actually in the rolls in fiscal 27. Right now we have about a $40 billion tax base. So that means we have about $4 million equals 1 cent of the property tax rate. It's $4 million. Going down into the sales tax, this one we had tremendous growth during the pandemic when people were at home pretty much buying things online. Just really fueled our growth. We had over 18% growth year over year, which was really unheard of for us. We declined to 6% growth in 23, and this year it's been flat. In 24 it was flat. In 25 we picked up. So on this one now, it's your underlying retail sales, what people are, how much they're buying, and the cost of goods. So inflation impacts it. So the higher cost of goods, the higher taxes. And so, so the underlying sales is very slow and has not really grown in the past year, not expecting it to grow very much next year either. So what has changed though is when the allocation methods. So Guilford gets to assign how they allocate to all the cities within and themselves within Guilford County, and they've selected the ad valorem basis. So how we get our allocation base is based on the levies within Guilford County. So, for example, if Guilford raises their levy very high and nobody else does, the following year then they would get a higher share of the sales tax. So last year that was a reflection. We went down last year in 24 because the prior year in the reval year they went higher than others in the county. Whereas whereas in '24, Greensboro raised their taxes 4 cents, or 4 cents. Nobody else did. So in '25, we're receiving more allocation because our levy is a higher proportion. So it goes back and forth like that. So next year, High Point in this current year raised their taxes for this year. Means the rest of the group will get less taxes in '26. So it's just a reflection of how those levies go up and down. So not only how people are buying, it's who's doing what with their taxes. And we could benefit, we could lose. And so that's just kind of how that's working. So it looks like next year will be slow growth, just in underlying sales. And then also we'll take a little bit of a loss. We thought maybe under $1 million just because High Point raised their taxes last year.
Yeah, I was wondering about that when I read it last year, but High Point affected us.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, so
We
that's,
losing money to them.
well, they would take more of a sales tax allocation because it's all based on property tax levies in the prior year is how it gets figured.
Is our tax rate higher than High Point's?
Well,
Is that not looked at?
it's not the rate, well, the property tax rate.
Property,
It's
okay.
just a change, the change. And then how much that equates to in a levy amount, the total levy.
So we need to buy them.
Everybody needs to buy more. And so the last point on here is that third bucket, this intergovernmental, which is these other kinds of utility sales tax, that's actually grown. And that's, I think, a reflection of just utilities or electric as the rates have gone up. And so we're paying more. But just, it's really hard to predict that. It's lots of weather related is what generates the electric. Final one is the ABC. Board is another shared vision or an intergovernmental. That one during the pandemic, it was double this, 6 million, maybe 7 or 8 million in the pandemic. Now we've gone back. It's typically been about 3 to 4 million over the years, and they cut back a little bit to 2.5 because they're keeping more working capital and doing some improvements. So again, these are really our drivers on the revenues.
Yeah, and we're also buying all of our properties for the ABC board. For the last 2 years and going forward, we're purchasing the property and owning it ourselves as opposed to leasing, so that's made a difference in our need for capital.
So what's the trajectory on that? Do y'all
We're
know?
going to continue to own in the future.
So there's not a scale.
More will come back to the cities in the outlying years because of the increase in sales.
Right.
They get up in volume.
Yeah.
So
Although, you know, alcohol consumption is pretty flat right now.
That's
Really,
right.
we're down at the restaurant and bar level.
Really?
Yeah.
Just because of the cost.
Right.
And we're sort of staying flat because people are buying lower price. We're selling more lower price, less premium, but it's pretty flat right now. Down at the bar and restaurant.
So those are our prepared comments. Anybody has any questions?
I will note, you'll see on the slide that this is a reval year for effectiveness in what we would call the second year budget, fiscal year 26, 27. It's too early probably to talk about projections, but we do think the reval will be healthy in terms of increasing our total valuation in 26, 27. So revenue neutral rate will probably be considerably lower than our current rate. And council at that time will have to decide whether to go all the way to revenue neutral or somewhere around that. But just as maybe a summarizing comment, Marlene said this was 90% of the general fund, and basically it was slow, and slower. So those are some of the challenges that we face as we're trying to put together the manager's 25-26 budget.
So, expenditures, revenue. So we're, based on what I saw, we're 5 million in the hole.
That's our projection for the current year. Yes, sir.
Okay. What's our plan?
As part of what this is, to make sure that we identify those things that are important to you. And as we go back, we got two more slides to talk about the importance, and then we'll begin to shape out.
Because I can't ask any questions, just wait.
Oh, you can, but
No, I can be patient.
all of this factors into.
It's my virtue.
And I think from this slide, our current theme is gonna be, drink more, spend more.
Then why do you got bottled water in here, Kevin?
They might be more.
Also, we have to keep in mind the decision we made, 2 years ago regarding our fund balance. I'm sure we're keeping that in
Yeah,
mind.
we gotta keep that.
So if there are no other questions, Mayor, I'll ask permission. I think if we got some time back, if you want to go straight to the next one, if everybody's in agreement with that.
Okay? Yes.
So Kenny McDowell will provide us an infrastructure discussion. Again, a lot of this are the things that you all said are important to you. And then collectively too, a lot of things we heard from you all through the year and over the last couple of months.
So as Kenny's getting ready to make his presentation, I know we just talked about budget challenges, and I don't think this was included, but it's worth noting that the legislature is considering eliminating Powell bill funding for cities over 100,000, which of course we are. And it is significant money, 9 million? So we really need to keep an eye on that, and there might also be an adjustment in the retiree benefits that we would have to pay into for a cost of living increase. So those two things are hanging out there that we really don't know if they're gonna happen, and if they do, what those impacts are.
Madam Mayor, I recommend having some type of update on from our state lobbyists on what their recommendations are, what their vision or thought process, what conversations are happening, because that's huge.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, the Powell bill is huge.
It is huge.
And so if we're 5 million in the hole here, and we got 9 million in the hole here, you added $50 million here. I don't know how all this math's gonna work.
So, Metro mayors, obviously, we've been in contact with the legislature and using our lobbyists to let them know that the Powell bill funding would have an extreme negative consequence, and also concerns about having to increase the budget for retiree.
Is the Powell bill, what is the thought process behind that? Is it to fund Western North
Your
Carolina?
legislatures, the majority of them are from small counties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the
And it's to reallocate that funding,
And they're gonna come after sales tax one of these days soon.
Don't give me any ideas.
Just telling you, they're already talking about it.
That was the problem with the league for me, we had too many small counties and no rural folk.
100 counties.
100 counties, people live somewhere.
Yeah, but just.
Most of them wouldn't even be a town.
well, and there is that bill that's also pending.
Yes.
Where they're studying the paper towns.
Yeah,
And-
that's another.
We need an update from our folks.
Absolutely.
Well, there's several bills that are being slashed. HUD
That's-
office is being abolished, so that's gonna affect the small businesses.
I've heard about 5 or 6 state bills.
Sharon, I was looking at the Senate portion, that's in the budget. The House one's easier to take a look at because it's a standalone bill.
Yeah, but that Senate bill 257, that's the one where they're abolishing of the HUD office and funding.
So it's
And even
450.
universities. it's 450 pages long.
I know.
But it's
Where it is in the.
I'll find it, because I know it's right in the beginning,
Okay.
pretty much. I've got it.
Okay.
I think in the interim, I want to ask Deputy Attorney Covich, she's been attending the Metro Mayor's meeting on Friday, Zach, we'll work with the lobbyists to get an update from the state level. But in the interim, she can provide us, or provide you all with an update on what the discussions have been and where they are, and what some of the expectations are. We'll work on that longer presentation. You can do it.
I'll gladly cede my time.
I have this in email. I've updated and summarized all the bills that concern us as a city, all the pros, all the cons, the talking points that I'm hoping council will look at so that we can send a voice back to our lobbyists as soon as possible. I'll get that
Quickly.
I can email it to one person. I sent you.
All right, thank you, Mayor, members of council. This will be relatively brief compared to other things. Of course, stop anytime with questions. I've heard some questions already. I was thinking about your 4 o'clock comments. I was trying to jump on board with that.
I got a tea time.
I understand. It is nice out. So when we talk about municipal infrastructure, we spoke a little bit about the paying as you go for your maintenance back during your retreat. This is a little more focused on kind of our overall infrastructure thinking and the budgetary considerations that we try to take into account. And again, with all this legislative stuff in play, it can have dramatic impacts on this as it can all our operations. But really, you want to talk mainly about these 3 topics. The things we pay for every year, kind of out of our ongoing operating budget, cash flow, and then what we're currently building now. Active projects. Anybody that's driven around downtown lately knows there's a lot going on, at least downtown, but also everywhere else too. We all drive in downtown regular, so we see a lot. And then we'll talk a little bit about what all these considerations go for planning for future projects, gets into the bond discussion, state and federal partners, things like that. So just more of an overall budget infrastructure focus. We'll start out with what it takes. Same thing it takes for all this stuff, it takes money. Digital, Bitcoin may be real, I don't know. When I hear money, I think this. That's just me though. So first off, this will be a little recap from what we spoke about at the retreat. The city has a lot of stuff. And this is just some examples of things that you see every day. There's water and sewer lines in pretty much every street in the city. You drove here on some type of city street that's paved. You're in some type of public building pretty regular for meetings, downtown, throughout the districts, etc. And I'm not going to read these numbers, but bottom line, we got quite a bit of stuff. Several assets, they all require some type of routine maintenance to keep them functional. And that's just the things we already have. When we talk about maintaining these things, there's things you got to do all the time. You got to wash windows. You got to vacuum carpet. You got to do pest control. Just things that you'd have to do like at your own place where your residence is. Things you do routinely. There's also minor things that happen. You're going to spill something on the carpet. You're going to have to blot that up. Somebody's going to break a piece of glass. Something's going to happen. That's like a minor repair. We kind of think about those every year of the budget. Kind of plan on a certain amount of that happening. We don't know exactly where it's going to happen or when it's going to happen. But like water main breaks, we know they're going to happen. We don't know exactly where. If they did, we'd fix them ahead of time, but we don't know. There's also things that just wear out over time. A roof on a building, major components that, we basically try to get all the life out of stuff we can. If we have a good air conditioning system, just because it's 20 years old, we don't automatically replace it. If it's running fine, we let it run. Many of you that have driven around town now, I still see the old avocado green refrigerators being set out on the side of the road on bulk base sometimes, because those were built to last. Nothing you buy today lasts like that. So we kind of keep all that in mind with all our assets. We don't just replace something because it's time. We make sure we actually need to replace it. And that's a certain amount of funding each year. Again, there's just the bottom line, there's a lot of engineers in the city, a variety of professionals, budget professionals, finance folks. We all look at industry standards, we run models, we have databases, we have a lot of ways to capture and collate this information so we can try to make logical decisions. And we come up with kind of a plan of what we would need to do each year to have a truly sustainable system. And that roughs out to these numbers. You know, they need to replace about 1% of our water lines a year. So if you're replacing 1% a year, you're basically counting on a water line lasting 100 years. That's a pretty long time. Roads don't last as long. I mean, many of you have lived in the same area for a long time. You've seen some streets repaved more than once. They have a ton of traffic on some streets, never seem to get paved. But there is a method to that. And what that drives is an annual need. So there's an annual need that if we wanted to do everything the best we could based on what our industry profession tells us we need to do, we would need a certain amount of money, enough money to do 15 miles of water rehabilitation a year, 10 miles of sewer, 53 miles, center line miles of roadway resurfacing, and in facilities we need to do about $3 million worth of major repairs a year.
So can you explain to me, because I don't think I understand that rationale, when you look at roads. Why are we not looking at where roads have not been paved and looking at things being equitable? And so you're paving Battleground, and I'm just using that street name, 5 times, but you're not paving the street over here in 20 years. So why are we not looking at it from that perspective of, okay?
It's a needs assessment.
But that is a needs assessment.
But it's not an equitable.
But it's not an equitable needs assessment.
That's
and everything. So
looking at how much more traffic.
just looking at saying, well, and more traffic is on Battleground because we ain't got no choice but to drive from the east to go to the west to the stores over there. But that doesn't mean that the street I ride on to get there doesn't need fixing. And that's the problem. I'm driving in potholes every day. There's one right under the Bennett Bridge that I drove in the other day. Boom. And so why are we not looking at those things? We talk about equity being part of what one of our principles is. But why are we not looking at it from an equitable lens? You know, just 200,000 people over here on this street, so you pay this one over and over and over, but then over here, you don't pay. And that's not fair. I mean, I'm just going to say it. And we need to look at this thing different.
So I've asked Deputy Manager Wilson, his teams, and then, which include Executive Director McDowell's teams, to look at, as we approach this year's budget, to ensure that we prioritize, or if we have to reprioritize some of our infrastructure efforts to make sure that, just as what you're saying, those areas, and I think, you know, Councilwoman alluded to, and Hoffman alluded to in the end, you know, as we look at our needs assessment, how we evaluate our scheduling, if there's some areas that we need to reprioritize, Councilwoman, those are the things that we'll do approaching this year.
Please do.
And I will say also, there's some areas that we're already, and it just makes more sense for us. We're already allocating resources and funds in a few different areas, such as our corridors. You talk about East, I mean, you just mentioned that area in East Washington Street is already getting allocation of funding for us, so it only makes sense to make sure that if we need to prioritize our efforts in that area to enhance that, then those are some things that you'll see us do this year.
Well, the thing about Battleground is that's NCDOT, that's not the city. That's a totally different.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that she was saying that's a good
That's an
example.
example.
Like Wendover and Battleground, we paved all the time.
Well, don't get caught up in the thing. I use the name. That's what I said a while ago. I said I just threw the name out there. I mean, it could be another street. It could be, what I'm saying is what I'm saying. See, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about equity, and it's not being heard. That's what I'm talking about. So whether it's Battleground, Lawndale, nothing, I'm saying to you, there's more activity on one side than the other. And I think that's where we need to be looking at from that.
Yes, just right, and you'll find out.
So moving on from maintaining the things we already have, we're obviously building new stuff all the time. And I've got some examples, I've highlighted 3 current projects we're building, and I'm highlighting 3 future projects. But as many of you likely recall, we produce a project management report every 3 months. It's distributed to council. It's posted on the website. And it has a list of what we consider major projects. And major is kind of a beauty's in the eye of the beholder type thing. What's major to one person is not to another, et cetera. But there's a lot more projects going on in the city than the 3 I'm going to talk about. But I wanted to point out some examples of some things that we're doing and kind of how this factors into the budget. First one is the big equipment services garage that's being built off Patton Avenue. It's currently, this is just a rendering of it because the site is still vacant. Activities just started. As most of you know, we've run into some soil issues we're having to have investigated. But that's about a $30 million project. It's going to be delivered under construction manager risk. Council's already authorized and approved this project. And essentially, until we know what's going on with the soil, we don't even have a good idea for what the actual financial impacts and the overall schedule will be. But there is potential that something may need to come back to council either through some type of bond or some other type of action, depending on the extent of what we have to do to ready that site.
Kenny, we just got an email from Sam on the equipment service door just
Okay.
now.
Okay.
Just came in, delayed. I don't know if you've seen it.
I have not.
Yeah.
Next is the downtown Greenway. This is a Chris Wilson legacy project. If you look closely, you'll see Chris Wilson with the broom. That's not true, but it could be true because he is out here a lot. This is also near the part where Councilmember Matheny and myself stood out front of Wapco Mill many years ago when it flooded, and we're going to fix this when we do the Greenway.
Yeah.
So this is an active ongoing project. This is actually going to complete the project downtown, which many in this room have been working on for many, many years.
Yes.
It's a very signature process.
And when will that be completed?
It's supposed to be fall of this year.
By December 2nd?
That's winter, so I'm hoping fall, but anything can happen in construction.
I mean, this is ridiculous.
It's been a while.
1908. 2008.
It only feels like 1908.
I meant to say 2008.
Yeah.
But it's a great project.
Yes.
And we'll be thrilled when it's done, but it's time to do something.
And this is an example where the city's leveraged, state and federal
absolutely.
partners for funding to get this project complete. Though it has taken a while. Construction can be complicated. Nowhere more so than downtown. Next is a big project we're getting ready to kick off. Actually, demo has started out at Windsor Chavis this week, and this is going to be a major signature project for the city. This is the largest building we've ever built, funding-wise, and it also has the most variety of funding that I personally have ever seen with a city project. Getting funding from the county, from Cone Health, from grants, a variety of funding sources to bring this $75 million project, which is the current estimate, to life. That's a construction manager risk project as well. Again, some early demo activities are ongoing this week, but the actual buildings and stuff should start coming down in the next week or two. So this is finally making some progress, and it's currently, so again, this is out there, so anything can happen, but around fall of 2027, that's kind of a projected completion and move-in date. Again, this is a very high-profile project for the city.
Kenny, you put, you going to the next slide? Okay.
Yes.
I'm trying to keep up. Okay.
You good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make one example. It's kind of an observation, and these numbers, when we talk about taking care of the things we already have and paying to go maintenance, when we build new things, we have to program in money to maintain those as well. Windsor J is going to be a beautiful facility when it's complete, but it's also going to be very large. It's going to take a fair amount of money to operate on a regular basis. Now, we're closing some stuff down, and that'll reduce an overall net number. But again, just the ongoing building maintenance and operating expenses of about almost close to $500,000 a year is projected. $125,000 in energy costs a year. So that's the type of thing that expenses like this, when you build new stuff, it's great, but it creates additional pressure to the city's budget, going forward. So that's why as we move even further in the future and we start thinking about planning our future projects, we need to do everything we can to, when we're expanding in some areas, building nice new facilities, we also need to look to try to eliminate things that we don't need anymore, get things off the books in a kind of a business term. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as a wrap up.
So as a question while you're there, unless some of my other people have a question, one of the things I want to ask, are we considering an endowment? Because that is a problem for me, is that we've got, right now, deferred $200 million in deferred maintenance all across in our Parks and Rec department. And they're only asking for $500,000 to get started. But we're gonna build something nice and new in East Greensboro. We need to be now planning to make sure there's money there for maintenance and not just build it, say we gave it to y'all, it's nice, and then in 5 years, it starts peeling and crumbling, and then there's no money. We're right back in a budget retreat. But 450 is not gonna be sustainable. And so he talked about that, such expenses placed ongoing pressure on the sustainable city budget. That's in this presentation now. So there needs to be an endowment created that's going to be able to sustain the maintenance of a building. I'm sorry about that, what I said. So we need to start considering that. The second thing, the buildings that we currently own, that we have for sale, why are we not pushing selling them? And when we sell them, where's that money for? That money could go back into an M&O budget as well. So we got buildings, and I started listing them last night, going through where they are. And I want to know why. I didn't go to bed, no, I went to bed about, no, I didn't. I stayed up about 3 o'clock this morning.
Is that what you want to do downtown?
No, I'm on 8:30. You ain't coming at 8:30 in the morning. I don't even know why you do that. You don't want to be there.
I do better. I do better.
But I was there with you.
There you go.
But I listed several things in here that we need to really start focus on selling and how we can bring that money into an M&O budget. If we're going to start maintaining, I need to replace Warnersville. I don't need to, but Warnersville needs to be replaced. We're talking about Brown. It's little. Building short farm and a Parks and Rec, collaboration with the fire station. So that's going to be something else that's getting ready to come online too. That we're going to need to make sure money's there for maintenance and operations. So we need to get serious about selling these vehicles, Chris.
I am selling as fast as I can. I wish I got a commission. We are actively pursuing sales of property that we believe should go to a higher and better use. We're also exploring options. You mentioned a park space. There are times that we acquire acreage beyond what we would need to develop something like a park. So there are opportunities to look at. Maybe you sell a few acres for residential because we have an initiative to get more residential so that you can get income to create a better development at that park space. We've got other opportunities. You're right. We have an inventory of property that we certainly could look at. Some of that is a long play. We don't always have prime real estate, and some of those properties are remnant pieces that are hard to sell, but sometimes you can package it as part of something else that's going on in the area. So I'm happy to chat about the things that we are working on. Some are under contract, some that you know about. I couldn't agree more. I think there are ways to create income through property sales, particularly knowing that we have a need for additional housing.
Sorry, Ken.
Oh, no, that's a great point. I mean, I'm glad, I think this was purpose, part of why the manager wanted to bring this bigger group together and talk about this variety, because there's a lot of points like that I think this discussion is helpful for. I mean, we're working on things like that, but it's good to hear the thought process behind it. So now we'll talk a little bit more about some coming future projects. One's the Eastgate City Boulevard improvements that we're working on developing now. It's going to add new sidewalks, bike lanes, turn lanes, curb and gutter on Eastgate City between Willow Road and Florida Street. That's about a $4.5 million project. Again, that's going to be some city funds, and again, leveraging our state available partnership funds to get as much out of the city dollars as we can. We're projecting to bid that this fall, so coming up pretty soon. Take a little over a year to build, and it'll be a traditionally bid project. East Vandalia Road, I know this one's close to some council members. I've had multiple discussions over the years. Unfortunately, this project has had a number of setbacks over time. The most recent is the federal government's revision of the floodplain mapping, which, as many of you have been around for a while, flood mapping was my thing for a while. And the federal government, they change it every 8 years, whether they need to or not. So, and that's fine. I mean, it's appropriate in my opinion as an engineer. But it does create impacts, and it puts you right back to the drawing boards a lot of times. And that's what's happened here really twice, given the time that this project has been in development. Currently, this project is projected to be around $4.8 million and to be built completely with city funds. I've heard we may look at an opportunity to try to get some state funding on this. I'm not sure exactly what the status of that is. As many of you likely realize, all of Vandalia Road is not currently within the city limits. So our transportation department is working with NCDOT to get that put into the city limits, because we can't spend city money, it's not in the city limits, on roadway projects. So
let me tell you what the verbiage NCDOT has recently done to that community. And so you talk about the Greenway that's been around since 1908.
I misspoke. It was
2008. 2008. Vandalia's been around since 1990. Okay? When you talk about being inequitable, this project right here, in this community, and so yes, there's some culvert redesign. What can we do to push this? Because now we're talking 2028. It's gone from 2025, 2026, now it's 2028. The president of the neighborhood has died during this time. Older citizens over there, most recently.
Eisenhower plans to do that much bigger than this.
I think so, absolutely. And so most recently, it came up that NCDOT was going to weigh in and turn this into a state road, and it was going to cut through a black community and everything. We need to clean this up. We need to clear this up, because Band-Aid is not a cut through. It was going to go all the way over to 421, tractor trailer trucks. Now it was going to be a highway, a cut through. We already know what 29 did to a community where it cut us off over there and it's divided that. 29 is one of the worst highways ever. And what it done to a community. Now they're talking about, well, this is what is being said to them, that NCDOT, and so it's concerning what is going on now, what is coming out. I just had a conversation this morning with Mr. City Manager about it. And I did talk to the president of the neighborhood association that lives over there. And it is upsetting to them as well. And that this project is taking this long. We have an obligation to go back to that community and clear this up. And meet with them. And go back and tell them what the plans are, why there are delays. I've explained it, but there were some other things that Hannah said to me the other day that is holding this up. that we as council could write a letter and ask them to speed this up. There's some EPA stuff going on as well. And we need to weigh in on this. Where we can make a difference and be an influence, we need to do that for these projects, because this is too long. Yeah, your greenways out there from 2008, this community wants a sidewalk. A blind lady, Dr. Ahmad texted me about this the other day. And so, you know, she's like, I could at least walk on the sidewalk. Yes, ma'am, you could in your lifetime, I hope. So we need to be really truly focused on this, you know?
Kenny, could you take a moment to talk through, I know one of the portions is obviously the communication, and I think we can step into that some. Obviously, the community, from the community's aspect, they don't always immediately identify, well, this is NCDOT or this is the city of Greensboro. Can you talk a little bit about our position and what we've done to try to accelerate this out?
Sure. So this project is essentially, as I mentioned earlier, Vandalia is partially in the city, but partially in the county, which makes it difficult for the city to expend the funds in the county portion. So the process began with NCDOT many years ago to get this all tightened up's not the right word, but tied together so that it could be built as a city project. And that's still ongoing. I think that's close to the end based on discussions with Hannah Cochran and Transportation. But essentially, until that's done, we couldn't really go out and buy the right of way for it. But a lot of that's already been done. This culvert issue is like one of the last or most recent things that really threw us for a loop about 18 months ago. And there's a big process involved with the federal government when they revise those flood maps. There's months of notification, things can change. So you can't really start because you don't know where you're going to have to end up, and you might be wasting your effort with that. So we focused on other projects while that was getting sorted out. But in the end, the project you're speaking about, the potential extension of Vandalia to 29, that's been on an NCDOT thoroughfare plan probably for 20 or 30 years. That is completely separate from this project, and this in no way sets us up to make that project. I would even argue us making this a 3-lane road is going to make it harder for them to try to make it a 4-lane road later if they wanted to. Can't predict the future, obviously, or I'd be in a different business. But that plan has been out there for a long time. As far as I know, there's no funding been identified for this road to be extended any further than what we're talking about now. And of course, we welcome any support the council can help with the NCDOT and the federal government processes that are involved with a project of this nature.
And to be clear, this is a city road, not a state road.
That's correct. It will be a city road, yes. And so we'll be responsible for the maintenance and all those type things going forward, which is what allows us to put sidewalks on it, as you well know from some previous projects we've worked on together.
But I think that it's out there now, before we move on to ANY, is that Vandalia is going to become a cut-through road, maintained by NCDOT.
And this is actually the exact opposite of that.
And that's what we need to get clear on. We need to make sure the community understands that and is clear on that, because there's some rumors starting to hit now. And y'all gonna probably hear it in a little while, because there's some people mad about it.
Like Tuesday?
I can't promise. I don't know. You might. I don't know. So we just need to make sure we're clear what the intent is in this project, but also how quickly can we factor in to help move this along. It's 2028. I mean, it's been around a long time. So let's see what we can do. I understand federal government, God help us. Pray for them every day. But if we, that we can control, we should.
We'll look at it. We'll take another look at it.
Thank you.
The last near-term upcoming project I wanted to just briefly touch on is the Atlantic and Yak and what commonly known as ANY Greenway Bridge up off Strawberry Road. Obviously, it's been closed for a little while. Worked with NCDOT in partnership to secure some funding so that we could get this redesigned so we can open that back up. Also going to do some pedestrian safety crossing enhancements there where people park on one side of the road and have to cross a pretty heavily traveled road to get to this greenway. Again, just trying again to move forward, give people options that don't want to drive everywhere or drive somewhere to park and then go exercise. I mean, once this is back in place, and with the greenway being finished up, and then the next portion hopefully coming on soon, we're continuing to make improvements for things other than just single vehicle occupancy transportation options. So that's kind of what we've got, what we're building now, what we're getting ready to build. But as all of you know, in the roles that you're in as council, we have to think even further ahead. And budgetary-wise, funding considerations, they're critical for all projects. If we're going to try to build something that's going to cost $50 million, we need to kind of have an idea of how we think we might pay for it before we start expending a lot of effort and funds to try to get that. Capital improvement planning, it's just vital for the long-term viability of the city, any city. Of course, we're most concerned with ours, of course. That all starts with council vision, and I think again this is a good different approach that I've not seen before that the manager suggested to kind of get everybody in the room and talk about these big picture issues, because this infrastructure and infrastructure planning, as y'all mentioned, Greensboro's been a city since 1808. Well, we haven't been working on the Greenway that long, but sometimes it feels like it. So we've got to really think about the future, what we want to do 10 and 20 years from now. We got to think about that now. That all starts with council vision, which the manager sets direction for staff on. This is kind of the plan. This is how we're going to work on it. And everyone in the city just about is involved with these plans. I mean, every department has to work on individual plans. They have to collaborate with other departments and think about, again, Windsor Chavis is a great example of library P&R collaboration. Of course, engineering, we're helping get that built. Lots of other departments are involved with that as well. That all feeds into kind of our budget evaluation process, which of course this is a big component of it, the annual budget. But they kind of look at all these plans and put all the pieces together and go, what do we need to be thinking about? How do we get from here to there? Because the future is what we're focused on. And again, the city has limited resources, and I sure hope Powell bill funding doesn't go away, because that's how a lot of streets that do get paved. Those local, state, and federal partners are crucial because they bring resources to participate with projects that are right here. I think it's great that they're building a huge new bridge in Baltimore where that barge ran into it. It doesn't impact my daily life here in Greensboro. But I need some of that federal money that if they weren't spending on that, maybe we'd get some more up here. So we kind of all got to work together to do that. And again, that's why I appreciate this opportunity to speak with you all about it. I heard some really good comments. And that's all I had. I'll entertain any questions, of course, but thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll power through the rest. to kick us off on permanent supportive housing.
Okay, and who puts it up into presentation? Nick? There, Nick? Yeah, one job. Okay, thank you. So I asked Trey, why are we doing, what's the purpose, what's the outcome? And apparently when he interviewed each council member to give him your top 3 priorities, permanent supportive housing ended up, when he sorted everything out, came into one of the top 3 out of the collection. So we could do a general overview and give you some updates, and actually some updates from the federal government, because you just need to know that what's coming down the pipe, or possibly coming down the pipe. Okay, I hit it, Nick? Down. What is that? Okay, just a reminder of what permanent supportive housing is. So we're talking about rental assistance and voluntary wraparound services. So it's not just housing units, it's a more complete package targeted toward the homeless, disabled, very low income houses with chronic housing instability. So it's typically a low barrier program trying to get more people into these types of units. And there's been several studies, analysis that this is a more cost-effective use of public funds than crisis intervention. So getting people into housing, getting them stable, getting them the services they need, I don't want to pit it against it, but in addition to shelters, and so there'd be less reliance on these other things. Let's see if I get down. Okay. All right. So our friends at NCHFA, they also put in, as part of this programming, it's our largest source of supportive housing production. It's been around since the Homestead Act in North Carolina. 10% of the units must be reserved for households with disabilities who are referred through the Department of Health and Human Services. So you've got to have, and rental assistance is provided through NCHFA, their Key Rent program. So actually, we put this number together about the total number of units for the last 5 years, but as Cindy, I may be the presenter, but Cindy is the data bank. And we actually have updated numbers. So Cindy, if you want to, we are doing, this is actually really good news on the number of units that we've done, but it's even better. So Cindy?
Yeah, so over the past 5 years, almost 15% of our multifamily housing units produced have been permanent supportive housing. And if you look back farther in our portfolio, there's another 112 units of permanent supportive housing, and if you include Partnership Village, that's an additional 68. So in total, about 350 permanent supportive housing units in our portfolio inventory.
So the demand, sadly it's growing, and we know that there'll be a high household, that there are more households in need, and we know, probably Zach knows this is as much as anyone, the number of chronically homeless individuals and families reflects this critical need for the supportive housing in our area.
Those numbers were low.
This is what I would say, this is what they can count. This isn't,
exactly.
And that's the issue.
So let me ask
So that's 1,000 plus, so what do you think?
I would say it's probably, 529 is probably more like 750-ish.
Okay.
And the families, unfortunately, are probably around 130 to 140.
Probably higher than that, because of all of the kids in the school system.
Yeah, well, that's families, that's not young kids that don't
Well,
have
but
families.
I assume they're part of a family.
Well, there's a lot that are runaways, there's a lot that have been kicked out, there's a lot that, it's different, it's varied.
Yeah, but those aren't usually the ones you're putting in apartments that get kicked out. They're going in the foster care system and stuff. My question is, right, where you talk about you having all these units, but how many people came off the by name list? Because that's what I continue to hear. You're not taking them off the by name list. There are folks on this list that need this housing, they're not getting.
And Sue is going to get to that on the next slide, the disconnect between the Department of Health and Human Services and our chronic homeless population and the referral process.
Because the COC is forever, I mean, we've got by name listed, it doesn't, nobody gets really, maybe one or two, you say, oh, we moved one or two, but it's more to even Zach's point and Nancy's point.
So here's what's under construction, what's coming up, we have in the pipeline, but to get quicker to Councilman Hightower's, I'll get one more. Cindy's gonna explain this on Summit. So this is, council approved this project, this is an update of where we are. This is a combination of multiple funding sources for this project on Summit. We've run into multiple problems with construction costs and bids, so we're partnering with the developer to determine what the final cost, the project cost and the feasibility.
Who's the developer?
That was,
Sorry.
no, it's okay, you go ahead, you just read my notes, because I don't know either.
It's amazing how much Sharon and I think alike.
I know, it's
I know how you felt about it from the very beginning, both of them about it. I just thought, I'm thinking that maybe we ought to sell that. That ought to be one of the properties that we sell.
I didn't think we should buy it first.
I know you did, and so then, but it just doesn't, I just think something else needs to happen with that.
The only problem is we can't get what we paid for.
That's right.
Yeah,
We're trying to
Well,
sell it.
maybe
We
we'll get
lose
something
money.
for it and get something out
Have to
there.
pay up.
So, because the people in the folks on that guard, or those business people, they weren't really contacted like they should have been. And so they were not in favor of it at all.
Well, we have HOPWA funds, that was the intention to use them for. If we send the funding back, we're not likely to get funding again. And you don't send
And we
funding.
can't put it somewhere else for affordable housing, permanent supportive living.
Well,
We still have the need.
It has to be used for HOPWA. It has to be used for people living with AIDS. It can't be used for a different demographic. So my concern is that this has been pending for a long time, that I don't know if we're going to be put in a position where we might have to return that money. I'd like to hear more about it. If we do, that sends a very bad message.
Cindy, can you talk about that? I'm sorry.
No, you're fine, I understand, but at the same time, I think we need to look at all the uses of HOPWA money within, because people want to live, we talk about people wanting to live everywhere. You don't have to concentrate all of them either in one area. I think you're gonna put a stigma on that, and there's already been some concerns about that. And so I think that if you're helping in other areas to still serve that population, and working with the COC and who's doing, things that they want to try to get done, and at the service center, you got all these folks that are doing some of this and serving these individuals. I think the money can be utilized, and we've used HOPWA money in the past for other stuff.
I think we've had to give HOPWA money back in the past because we didn't have the ability to use it.
We just haven't used it, I think we need to make sure we use it. And how it can be used, and that's part of the problem. We let folk decide one way, and then when it don't go that one way, we can't do nothing else. And I think we need to explore it differently.
So Triad Health Project is working with AHM right now, Affordable Housing Management, with Grant Duffield about an updated proposal.
So I think the bottom line is we need to bring you back information, because there's several things pending, right? The HUD award, continuing care, other funding potential, and also the affordable housing management, what they are able to do. So we will have more information, but as part of that information, bringing you information about alternatives. Should that not work out, what are I can talk at the end of the day, alternative uses for HOPWA funds and maybe suggested projects. This is where the challenge is, we wanted to bring to your attention. There is a disconnect between the Department of Health and Human Services and these agencies for housing referrals. We're having some issues. We know that this is, I'm going to cut to the chase in the bottom piece. There has been an executive memo from the White House stating it is not the intention of the administration to fund homeless services for housing in the future. That it is, so not, that doesn't mean CDBG, but for homelessness, any kind of housing programs that address homelessness.
So Trey, Chuck, and I met with HUD on Tuesday, and we did ask them for some direction, and the woman we were meeting with said, you know, if I tell you something now, 10 minutes from now, it can be completely different. So HUD seems to be in a state of flux right now.
One small ray of hope was the fact that they indicated HUD does like mixed-use ideas, which are some of the things that we're already looking at. So that may help us drive some of the direction of what we're looking for, and we may have to readjust some of our strategy. But like you said, man, that we should hear something more definitive.
Yeah, the secretary is going to be testifying, I think, at the end of the month, next month. Right. And she's going to get in front of his comments, so she wouldn't respond.
So what is their definition of mixed use?
More of an opportunity for housing and some type of retail.
But also mixed income too.
Yeah, okay.
It's what I've been asking for forever, but it's like, there's just this pushback on doing it.
Well, it was because HUD's focus previously had been housing first.
Yeah, that's what they said they were rejecting.
So, since we're talking numbers, we get about 5.5 million in HUD funds every year. If the just current reconnaissance is true, we're talking about $3 million would be not available next year, next funding cycle. That we anticipate that CDBG is a very popular bipartisan program, and home funds, we believe, are okay. They're kind of wobbly, but CDBG is more firm, home is wobbly, and anything dealing with homelessness is really scary. They have homelessness in terms of housing. So there is no identified source of how to replace those funds. So that may mean finishing out projects, and then we're just going to have to reduce our attention in this area unless council directs other sources to be directed to this issue. We don't have, these are kind of dealing with these. I think Cindy and I redid these slides, 4 times in 3 days, just based on different things that we got from HUD, and what it would be. The intention of this is to make you aware of the challenges that we are dealing with. And that's, I don't want to end this on a bad note, but,
I think I'll spin it a little more positively. Thank you. It looks like we are very close to getting the piece of property off of Wendover for a permanent supportive housing project given to us from the county. I've been working with a group of individuals that are committed to raising roughly $10 million to build a permanent supportive housing project that includes healthcare caseworkers. I've been talking to Moses Cone about their participation in it, and they are very interested, and we have another meeting next week with Moses Cone about them participating and putting some sort of health facility in that as well. That would address our on-the-street homeless population.
How many units?
We're guesstimating 75 units. But the goal of that $10 million is, and I might, with tariffs, God only knows what it will cost, but the goal is to include an endowment out of that money so that we would endow the project for ongoing we haven't gone too far because we're really waiting and dependent on that piece of property from the county, and until the county transfers that deed to us, we're,
So that's about $135,000.
right?
That's, yeah.
Yes.
Well,
So why
I mean,
county not factoring in, they have Department of Public Health, Health and Human Services, so why are they not?
we're hoping to get them involved as well, but we're taking one step at a time. And at this point, we're trying to get the property.
They don't seem to understand.
They don't
That's
know.
one of their mandated responsibilities.
No, they don't seem to.
Well, and hopefully they'll kick it off by deeding the land over to us.
Yes.
And that would be significant.
It would. So that would be the starting point.
Contribution.
But I don't know, based on your last conversation with the chairman.
I don't know
There's
if Chuck has had a conversation since.
I feel like it's
we
in a
did.
positive direction. Chuck may have had additional, there's a third party that's involved, I think you're all aware.
Right.
And I
He
think
means his ID.
it's just a matter of, moving forward.
I don't really have anything.
So at least that would be something
Yeah.
to kick off this direction.
Could there be a component on that property, Western vernacular for the funds?
Aqua?
Yeah. Could there be a component over there so we can do something, free up Summit Avenue, whether we sell it or not?
And the
I don't
timing
think
doesn't
it's gonna
work,
take a
yeah.
loss. But if there's a component, we could use those funds on that property, then we could do something else. Even if we plow that building, which we should have never bought, we should have plowed it anyway, that property becomes more valuable to a private entity, such as a restaurant or something like that.
Cynthia, can you help us 1 second?
Well, and we bought the money using housing, we'd have to pay,
Aqua back.
we'd have to pay Apple back in what,
Can you give us an
Yeah.
assessment on that HOPA funds as it relates to that specific property?
Yeah, we can take a look at it. We would need to be able to set it up from the beginning for federal funds. You can't just throw federal funds in the middle of a project, so we have to take a look at the conditions of sale and attach the appropriate riders to the contract.
What did you do for a living before you were?
Are those funds, are the HOPA funds?
I'm putting an attorney on TV.
Are the HOPA funds tied
He
to
does this during
Summit?
council all the time.
So,
I guess, so, I'm sorry, Dan, I want to make sure y'all get this point, because I know there's some different just opinions, and so from a staffing perspective, we need to make sure we get somewhat of a consensus amongst this council, so we can know how to move forward. So could you let us know if HOPA funds are attached to Summit? If we are nimble with the HOPA funds, can we identify an additional, will we lose them, or how do we
when,
move forward?
when does that bucket of money expire?
We're not in danger of losing it. They're not tied to Summit Avenue. We could place them somewhere else.
So they could be
But
transferred.
how long do we have to make that, you know, if it takes a few years for Wendover to raise the
Yeah, I
money
mean,
and
it's
stuff, I don't know.
it's gonna take more than 9 months to raise $10 million.
right, but it's gonna take more than 9 months for us to work out anybody doing anything on Summit Avenue.
And let me just say, Zach did admit during his state of downtown that he loves pallet houses.
I didn't say you lost.
He changed his mind.
But now I can admit when I'm wrong.
We're fully occupied.
And I was wrong. The bachelors have helped fill them up. But on Summit Avenue, I'm right.
You never know.
Regency Inn, I'm right.
And I acquiesce.
Well, so what I'm saying is, how we look at it, let's be strategic, and if you look at that corridor is a commercial, not a residential. Commercial property, if I'm not mistaken, Sue, a little more valuable than residential property is. So we could recoup, and I don't mind if we pay back housing. That's fine. Let's go invest as well.
I mean, just, we're recouping our money regardless.
That's it.
Yeah, we're not losing.
We're not losing.
Can you give us a timeout on the
Yeah.
usage of those?
We need to find out the usage of the funds we've spent already.
Right.
And if what Tammy's working on doesn't come to fruition for a year or two, can we hold that money that long, or do we lose it?
They max it out.
Okay, thank you.
But, I mean, and how much of it could be actually transferred to some other project? You're talking about, you know, AHM doing something, because they're already.
Well, AHM is looking at something.
So, yeah, where could that money actually be transferred to different things? It might not just be one.
I don't see any slides on there, Trey.
No, well, before, that's it, but before we adjourn, I just want to throw one thing out there. I know that, I have gotten numerous requests for people asking for funding, and these are usually, startup companies, you know, out of our next budget, and I think we need to have some sort of direction. Is there money in the budget to give to organizations, or is there not, and how do we answer that?
Why suddenly do we get all these emails about the children's museum? Did they not know?
They had a fundraiser the other night, and you didn't come, probably, but.
I didn't.
Did you go?
Something else to do.
So, Mayor,
I didn't either, but the
Mayor,
email
I'm-
started immediately the next day.
Somebody must have told them they should.
That night and the next day.
Well, and that's the way they've always done it, you know, where.
Well, in the past, they actually came to a couple of us and talked about their capital plan or whatever they were doing, but this was just out of the blue.
So, Mayor, I will tell you, the quick answer is no, and the additional answer is, you know, I've given Larry instruction that we will look at cutting programming inside. So we probably will have conversations with you all about some existing funding that we may look at cutting or not awarding again this year.
So it would be nice if we could have some consistent verbiage.
Yes.
I know I got 2 requests just since we've been sitting here
Yes,
for funding. So what does what does our unified answer
We'll provide you.
Nobody's emailing me, so I guess they know my unified answer.
No, I've got two also.
Yeah,
I say no.
But if there are some that have provided a service that we typically do, but, it's better to work with the outside contractor than should we look at that? Because I think there are some things that I'd like to see us keep funding, but some that I think we need to probably scale back on.
I agree.
Councilperson, I just really quickly want to say, a couple of years ago, we worked on this, and you all may recall, we moved to service contracts, because that's a different setup. So there are services that we need that are more affordable through a partner than doing it ourselves. And so we're not talking about that. We moved away from granting in the community granting some time ago. We have specific programs through specific departments that assist with that, but we do not offer that and have not for some years now. It is service oriented because we have programs in the city of Greensboro and services in the city of Greensboro that are unfunded or underfunded that we still need to satisfy, and that's why we moved away from that.
So for me, it would be helpful, because I am contacted every single day by somebody who wants money. And we just all have to be on the same page, and.
Larry will give us some strong verbiage.
Yes, because I tell people that, you know, we're under a hiring freeze. We're looking at not raising property taxes because
our
people.
revenues are down, our expenses are up.
Because everybody's coming to us, please don't raise property taxes, but that's what used to help pay for all these things. And if we're under a hiring freeze, we're looking at tightening our belt. So in order not to raise property taxes, is what I said. But we need something consistent that we can all say.
Well, I'd like to talk about that hiring freeze right quick. I'm glad you brought it up because it's on my list. What exactly does a hiring freeze mean to me when, you know, because I think that there are positions that we haven't, right, and so we really need to be serious about that. I mean, for example, even in code, I'd like to see us get a mold inspector in code. We don't have one.
That should be a county.
But we don't have, we get the calls, because from our code complaints, they're the ones that go out to the apartments, and the one I was sitting in yesterday, that looks horrible, they're the ones that get there. So we need to be helping to provide that service when we're talking around housing. housing units say. So I'm wondering, when you say hiring freeze, but if we've got unfilled positions, let's look at maybe reclassifying something like that.
So as we close out the
Because
last,
code is one of those ones we need to put more people in.
as we close out the final quarter of the year, the hiring freeze allowed us to tighten everything. Now that releases and opens back up July 1. So when you talk about positions or essential positions, then those are things that we definitely look at moving into the new year. But also during the hiring freeze, if you had something that was urgent or essential, Jemiah provided a wonderful playbook to allow us to request, such as if we had something that was urgent and needed, that was, for public service, then we would release that hold and give that allowance to that position.
But people that whole code compliance department, it needs some additional folk in it, so, we need to look at that, because we need to really look at how we, that is a big issue in the community, particularly in the community I represent. Front yard.
Chris is leaving, we'll move this out, we'll hire some pro people. Motion to adjourn.
I actually did plan it on the fiscal year with the hopes that you could use the savings.
So, we gonna hire.
A couple of your people will hire.
Oh,
Thank you all. Please give consideration to things I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, and if you could get back to us, I would appreciate it. Thank you. Oh, so Zach has moved it. Second. Mary Kay seconded. All in favor? Aye. Very good.